can you briefly give us an outline on the item 4 report and the view, obviously, to looking at recording facilities for Committee Room 2, although the way the chamber's set up and where people are sitting today, it makes it much easier rather than people sitting in political groupings.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I've really nothing to add to the report. You'll see we did a quick assessment of the pros and cons of Room 2 versus this room. We now have a council decision that it's for this committee and indeed any other committee to determine where their meetings will take place. In default, will take place in this room in the chamber. We can certainly look at the possibility of doing some work on the kit that's currently in the place to see what can be done about adding additional recording facilities in Room 2. We have had meetings recorded in Room 2 before. Those of you who have been on police and fire will recall that many of the police and fire disciplinary committee meetings are required by law to be recorded. So there is kit. It's not very good kit. And I think I would probably be saying we'd need to do a costing on what it would require to upgrade, or not upgrade, but to put recording facilities into Room 2. But I'm in members' hands on that one, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Haswell. I mean, I would like to probably start by thanking the committee for giving me the opportunity to hold the last few meetings in Room 2. It was a request that I asked at the beginning of the term, and I think it has worked well, although the room is quite small. I do feel that these committees do need to be recorded, so for that reason, I think it's correct until we look at recording facilities for that room that everything else takes place in this chamber. Councillor McKee, you wanted in.
Aye, thanks, Chair. I think if you look at pros and cons on page 7, the cons of using Committee Room 2 too small, I think that was justified when we were in there just now. The number of people that were in there, I think there was about 1 or 2 spare chairs, and it was far too crowded. The only other thing I would say was I would question whether it's in our remit to ask for the council to look at putting recording equipment in that room. I don't know whether it's our decision to take, but certainly I would certainly concur that all meetings should be held in here.
I certainly do think that the council are looking at recording facilities for that room anyway. I would reiterate that I think that's the correct way forward, whether it be for this committee or any other committee or business of the council. I think it's a good idea to look at the possibility of recording facilities for that room. But in the meantime, as I've said already, our meetings will continue in this chamber until we have any facility for recording in Committee Room 2. At that point in time, we can look at it again. As far as I'm concerned, I think that's us covered item 4, and we'll move to the recommendations. Sorry, Archie, did you want in on this? I mean, if you're going over old ground, I'm sorry, I just think we need to move on. If it's anything to do with the room facilities being too small, etc., we've addressed that. We're here today. We're going to look at the facilities, and we'll look at it again thereafter. So, you know, unless it's anything new, I want to move to the recommendations. So, Chair,
and thanks again for sort of, making decisions without having input for the rest of the committee, of course, and it's no going over all ground, this. I mean, I think it's new
Councillor
ground.
Councillor Dryburgh, may I remind you that it was a committee decision to move to Committee Room 2 in the first instance, and after the first meeting, the agreement was that we would continue.
If you allow me to make the discussion, Chair, then I would.
Councillor Dryburgh,
Chair, you're not allowing me to.
Councillor Dryburgh.
Chair, you're not allowing me to say what I was trying to say.
You're criticising the reasons
I'm not criticising
for the committee
anything.
being in that room in the first place. It was a full committee decision where everybody was asked at that point in time. If you've got anything else to add, fair enough. Otherwise, we're moving to the recommendations.
Well, the recommendation is in the light of the principle to consider whether or not the Audit and Risk Management Committee continues to hold future meetings Room 2 unless the agenda indicates that the meeting requires to be held in Council Hall to accommodate public and or press interest. I actually think that recommendation should be removed and we just go with 2.1, which is that they're held in this particular chamber. At the end of the day, Chair, if we are going to spend money on recording equipment that we've already got in this chamber, then surely we as an audit committee are doing the wrong thing, because already we've seen a budget from the administration which is reducing to all services. Then we should be looking at ourselves and saying we shouldn't be costing the taxpayer in Dumfries and Galloway that money, so therefore we should be holding it in here. So I think the recommendation should be 2.1, end of story, and I'm quite happy to put that forward as a motion.
Mr Haswell.
Chairman, can I maybe help members? I think the Chairman's already agreed with all members that unless and until there are recording facilities available in another room within either this building or another building, then in accordance with the Council's decision, the meetings will be held here. Councillor McKee is quite correct. It doesn't fall, you do not have a budget to put in recording facilities. I have an outstanding remit to review the facilities within the overall complex. There is more work to be done in the overall complex. What I would be doing would be bringing a report back to the Policy and Resources Committee at a later date regarding all of the facilities available. And if recording is able and the Policy and Resources Committee determine that they would like to have recording facilities in room 2, not necessarily for this committee but for other reasons and other purposes, then that would be part of the report. But this committee does not have the power to say we will spend any money on recording facilities. That's not what you said, as I understood it, Chairman. What you basically said is we'll wait here and see what happens.
Okay, can we go to the recommendations, please? Councillor Ferguson.
Just some governance advice here, because my understanding is if 2.1 goes through, 2.2 falls automatically.
Okay, we're moving to the recommendations. 2.1. Agreed? Okay. I think that you're quite right, Councillor Ferguson, means that 2.2 drops. So we'll move on to item 5. Thank you, Sue. You're going to take us through this report. Have you got anything to add to the report?
On item 2.1, I'm happy to take questions on recommendations for noting the progress of actions on health and safety. On item 2.2, I thought it might be useful to give you just a wee summary about introducing the plan, if that's what you'd like me to do.
Yes, please.
Item 2.2. The purpose of the Corporate Health and Safety Plan under Recommendations 2.2. The corporate plan purpose is basically to give the Council focus and to comply with our legal obligations to plan, organise, control, monitor and review our Council's preventative and protective measures on health and safety. The principles of the plan do follow the Health and Safety Executive Guidance Notes, principles of good health and safety management. Particular points I'd like to refer you to on the corporate actual plan, the cover note, that's this one here, the Word document. You'll see that we have an overall mission statement for health and safety to try and get into the behavioural aspect of health and safety, to make it integrated, and our council mission under, this is page 3 of the corporate plan, this one here, okay, page 3, okay, that's the one, page 3. Okay. Page 33. Okay. The mission statement is for our council to have a positive health and safety culture that is within everyone's mindset and is part of day-to-day business. And you'll see within the Corporate Health and Safety Plan we have 7 key objectives. Okay.
For members in your papers, it's page 17, 18, etc.
Right. Okay. No, it's not this one. It's... That's it. It's page 17, yeah. Okay. The key features of the corporate safety plan are basically, you'll see from the actual spreadsheet that actions are for everybody, okay, whereas the corporate plan before wasn't. You will see that there are actual 2 action points on the spreadsheet, even from elected members right the way through down to staff, the chief executive, the director of safety and myself, as far as the actual spreadsheet is concerned. The actual format of the report also takes into account trying to encourage working together for all council staff. And it's also in a format that's easily filterable. So if I'm a director, I can filter the data. So it's just filter the information down to directors. And it's also more transparent when we come to do our audits as well. The actual workload balance, what we've looked at within the corporate health and safety team to look at the change in dynamics is to look at, it works out as 38% corporate time, which includes corporate health and safety audits. It includes development of the council policies on health and safety, as well as corporate support. And 38% of it is actually giving support to directors themselves, the actual operational side. And just under 10% on joint initiative working. So we are looking at trying to be more collaborative working as well. You will note that there is an audit programme as well within your pack. And this is on a risk-based system. And this is developed further from the existing system that we had. And you'll see that, as I say, we've also introduced not just management audits now, but we've also looking at doing risk-based mini audits, looking at particular functions as well to allow us to be reactive. So it's a combination of management and risk-based audits. I'm happy to take any questions on the documentation.
Thank you. I mean, I have to say I'm very pleased to see this report here today, and I'm sure there are a number of members who will have questions to ask on it. Councillor Ferguson.
Morning, Sue. I'm just looking at the audit programme. Just for clarity, this is the corporate health and safety team's audit programme, not the departmental internal audit that they should be doing themselves.
This is purely the workload for the corporate health and safety team, yes.
Thank you. Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. There's concern, obviously, when we get outside contractors doing work for us. Now, do you, or is it a directorate that's responsible, actually visit these work sites from time to time when they're doing work for the council? And what sort of reaction do you get from these people?
Ourselves within the corporate health and safety team, part of our role, we do sample monitoring. But the directorates themselves, within their own procedures, should have like, for example, if it's a contractor, within their own procedures, they should be doing their own contract monitoring. So we're a level above that. And as part of the auditing system, we will do sample monitoring as part of that process.
Yes. I take it when they're issuing contracts, that'll be part of the contract, the health and safety action of that business, rather than... The council have procurement procedures, and within the pre-qualification questionnaire there's particular health and safety questions that are asked of a contractor in the initial stages, but obviously locally by directors as well per job they do have to look at specific competencies and management arrangements for are they competent for that particular project.
Just on the back of Councillor McKee's question, can I just ask then, so if the contract's an in-house contract, and obviously you've got external contractors assisting on your in-house contract, then the council do spot checks and actually make sure that health and safety is being adhered to, although it's actually a council project in the first place?
It depends on the nature of the project, on what actually happens. If it's an internal project like DG First doing a project, we will do sample monitoring. If it's an external contract and if it's a construction project, it'll be like the CDM coordinator. That is the role in legislation allows is that they have to do checks on paperwork before work is allowed to start. And again, depending on the nature of the job, whether there's a legal appointment needed for a construction design and management coordinator. And if that is the case, then we have internal, but we also do employ external as well on that role.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Driver.
Thanks, Chair, and like you, I'm pleased to see this being brought forward here, and I think it's something that needs to be encouraged for all departments to get involved with and things like that. It's just a couple of questions on page 18 of the on your risk-based support to each directorate, and looking at social work services, education services and community customer services. Obviously, one of the risks that's involved in there is actually dealing with the public, and the social work services, for instance. There will be some high-level problems with clients that they actually have. And you want to make sure that you're happy with the amount of days that you've actually got in there to support the directorate in that, and what other things the directorate has in place to help their staff when they deal with that type of hazard. A couple of other things is it goes in line with what the chair and Councillor McKee says. When new contracts come in place and they tender for contracts, part of the tendering process, I would imagine, is that health and safety policies and procedures and that would be included in what the tender aspects would be. And finally, just to say that I think the health and safety, of course, is a massive journey that we all take, and the goal is to have zero accidents. The aim is to have zero accidents. But I think it's a good step along the way. It might never happen that we have zero accidents, but it's a good goal to actually have. So I'm fairly pleased that this has come forward in the way that I actually have. But I think the policy and procedures of those contractors and the internal staff, making sure that they put things forward to ensure that health and safety is of a priority, is the right thing to do.
Come off here. As far as number of days per director, we basically trying to do the best with the resource we have, and we've done it on a risk-based process. So as you'll see with the likes of DG First, we've given them more safety office advisory times as well. The dynamics of the team have changed as well, so we are looking better in making use of the fully qualified safety advisor time that we have, and perhaps allowing some other work to be done by part qualified, but trying to get their specialist knowledge up as well. So it is trying to do a mixed bag. Some directorates most certainly do have their own in-house person, like for example DG First, Education, Plan Environment Services. The other departments, CCS, Social Work, CES, they have nominated persons and rely on other people within the services to support them, rather than it being a dedicated role as such within in-house. As far as monitoring health and safety, whatever actions are on the plans, it is something you'll see within the plan that each directorate do have to report to their service committee on progress against their actions on the plan. So it is something that you could ask for further information on, as far as that, how the directorates are progressing on the safety plans within their own directorates. As far as what you said about the accident zero tolerance, I think it's a good aim to have. You will see within the plan there is an action for having an accident reduction strategy, which we would perhaps look at driving and perhaps emanating through the safety coordinators and perhaps through Joint Safety Committee for that. Thank
you for that. I've got Councillor Wood waiting to come in. Councillor Ferguson, is it on the same issue or no? Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Chair. Like the other elected members, I also am pleased to see this report coming forward. I think it's a good comprehensive report. However, I would like to get clarification on 3.3, page 9, on the spot checks once again, and that is how regular are they, and what is the criteria that triggers such a spot check? I would also like you to go to page 13, where we're looking at Appendix 1, and where we're once again got it set out in charts, the various training. Can you give us an idea of how many staff are actually trained out, or should I say, what is the pooled number of staff that the number you have there stated as being trained? So it's to get an idea of actually how many we're really training in real terms.
The construction site inspections, basically we get a copy of the jobs that are ongoing and look at it on a risk-based process. For example, if it's a contractor that's getting used that we haven't used before, Obviously, a closer look as well at our in-house construction sites as well. But we do, it's very much, you know, the people that employ the contractors' duty to monitor the contractors. So this is over and above, and us supporting them in that process. So you talk, within the resources, I'm looking at trying to do one a week by our construction specialist. That's that of how the resource can allow, really, on that one. Okay, but as I say, it's over and above what they should be doing internally. Okay. As far as the training, I don't think that information is readily available. To my knowledge, it may well be through the corporate training development. As far as I get your point, this is the amount that we've trained, but what's the percentage of the people that have been trained out of the amount that should be? Okay, I appreciate that. You will see within the corporate health and safety plan again, I have put in an action there for the directorates to have a training needs analysis per directorate, so they should be able to actually identify which by post holder who should have what training, and then to do the training needs analysis for what training then needs to be. But we're not at that stage to be able to get that information readily at the moment, but we have put it on the plan for us to be able to be better at showing it. Okay.
Can I just ask, is it possible to get the information that Councillor Wood's asking for? I'm presuming that's what you were going to ask. In particular, along the lines of, if you're saying on page 13, for instance, that, I don't know, so social work services standby training, 10 people have been trained. How many people do that role? So what percentage is that 10 people? I think that's what Councillor Wood would like to have an answer to, if possible. So the figures look good on the paper, but if that was something of a percentage of the staff that carry out that work, then we would be looking for an increase in that training schedule.
Sorry. What we're looking at doing it is through the directorates to actually have a directorate health and safety training plan, which hopefully better identify that type of information.
Can I maybe try and help, Chairman? What we're saying here is that the number of people trained here you're saying are the number of people trained during the reporting period. We didn't just start training people during this reporting period. There will be people who've already been trained and been on refresher training and so on. I do take the Councillor's point. What we're trying to do is to make sure that everyone who is a member, a director, a chief executive, an employee of the council accepts their own responsibility in terms of health and safety. There is to be a drawing together by the directorates of those people who are trained up, and those lists will be gathered and we'll bring them back. Can I just remind you as well that the predecessor to this committee, which was a subcommittee, took the view that it wanted health and safety as part of the reporting mechanism to parent committees. Sue and her team cannot monitor absolutely everything that is happening on the council. You'd need an awful lot of people working directly in health and safety within the corporate team to do that. We are dependent on directors and their staff providing the information for the service committee. So that information will be coming forward, but if the member's asking for it specifically, we'll then gather the information as it comes forward from the directorates.
Councillor Wood, is that okay for you? Okay, thank you. Any other first-time speakers? No? Okay, Councillor Ferguson.
It's on the training again, and whilst I'm obviously pleased to see the number of courses that have been delivered in the last year, I'm also aware that significant numbers of people just didn't turn up to training or weren't given the facility to attend, which causes no end of frustration. Can we have some breakdown figures on non-attendance and the reasons for non-attendance at training that's been arranged for them?
So, have you got any idea as to what percentage of people did not turn up, and whether there's any department that's needing to have further investigation?
That information would be available really from the corporate development unit and also from the DG First Gaelic training unit. Personally, when we've delivered training, the non-attendees are very, very few.
I think that's the problem, but if it's a small course with maybe 5 or 6 or 7 people on, 1 or 2 not there is actually a significant percentage. And I think that's what I'm getting at. But to me, the biggest worry, Sue, is the underlying trend that it doesn't matter. Right? So that's the reason I'm asking.
To be honest, I have seen an improvement in that, to be honest, because I know there has definitely been improvements in this regard.
Councillor Ferguson will arrange for the information to be gathered from Gareth Training Centre, etc., so that we do actually have an understanding as to how many non-attendees there actually are and what percentage of that affects the course as well.
Thank you, Chair. And I think in actual fact I go a step further and suggest that the chairs of each of the service committees actually ask the same question and bring it back, because at the end of the day it's that service area's responsibility to make sure the staff are trained as well as the corporate centre.
Yes, well, we'll certainly find out that information and we'll make that suggestion. Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks for letting us back in, Chair. I'm just looking at the development plan itself on the bottom of page 1, which is 2.14, develop, facilitate effective health and safety arrangements for directorate, service, procurement, commission and contract. And I just wanted to make sure that within that particular part of the first aid needs assessment will be included in that. We have seen, for instance, a couple of times, and unfortunately in this chamber as well, where first aid is available, but perhaps not all of the equipment is.
Emergency arrangements covers all aspects of emergencies. It would cover first aid, fire, etc. Again, for something like first aid, it would be subject to a risk assessment by the lead occupier of the building if it's based on a premise, or indeed by the actual line manager if it's looking at the first aid needs of staff.
Thank you. Members, can we move to the... Councillor McKee?
Could I do just a quick follow-up to what Councillor Ferguson was saying? I think it's important that the message gets out from here that we put a high priority on health and safety. And I think, Ken, we didn't just pay lip service to it. We see it as a high priority, and that message should get out to various directorates and employees as well.
I think we'd be more than happy to make that point. Mr Haswell, if you could possibly take that on board, in particular to the directors of the services, and a note to the services committees that we feel it's appropriate that they monitor the situation within their own services.
If I can give members an assurance that the Chief Executive's one-to-one has a standing item with every director. There's a standing item on health and safety issues. There is a standing item as well on health and safety at CMT. So the corporate management team is very much aware now of its responsibilities. I wouldn't say that that was perhaps the case 18 months to 2 years ago, but I can assure members that I've put my name in a bit of paper and I expect that it will be complied with.
Thank you. Just before we move to the recommendations, Councillor Groom.
I would just like to thank Sue and her team for a most detailed action plan. I think we've all been pleased to see this coming before us. I think it's the most detailed plan that we've had here.
Thank you, Councillor Groom. Councillor Wood, is this on a particular issue? Because we do want to move to the recommendations.
Small item, and that is, in view of the fact we want to make this an important part of every single department, should we be looking at making it an item within the reports that come forward to committees?
I believe it already is, Councillor Wood.
It's part of the monitoring reports that comes forward. They're all aware they've got to put forward a health and safety monitoring report.
Thank you. Recommendations 2.1, please. Okay, and 2.2. Thank you. Thank you. Judex, could I ask you to come forward to take us through the report, please? Is there a card in that machine? I take it is working. No, you'll have to use the one that's got a card in it already, and if you press the button, the microphone should come on. If you've got anything to add to the report, is it working? Okay.
Hello?
Yeah. If you have anything to add to the report, if you want to do that now, and then I'm sure the members will have a number of questions they would like to ask.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, Chair, and Happy New Year to you all. As the Corporate Complaints Unit Manager, I'm delighted to be able to present to this committee the second year, an annual report on the performance of the Council in terms of dealing with customer comments, compliments and complaints for the year 2011-2012. The report before you is a draft report, and it is intended for this to be finalized on the approval of this committee, and it will be publicized on the appropriate website and disseminated as always. With me today, I have to my side Ms. Palmer, Christy Palmer, who is a member of my unit. She will be ably taking notes of any changes or any modifications that we need to make to the report, and will assist also with any additional information that you may require. I think, Chair, if judging by the reporting within the last 24 hours by the BBC on this complaints report is to go by, and I should stress that it's a very accurate summary of the contents within this report in terms of the headline messages that it contains. I think it might be very little for me to add, apart from giving some substance to those headline messages. I'd be happy to take questions, certainly, on the report. But before doing so, with your permission, I'd like to reflect certainly on the most important aspect of all this. We are here to discuss the theme of the report, which is about performance, but I think it's important, I think it would be remiss on my part not to mention the significant contribution that the customers, all our customers, play in terms of their feedback, be that in complaints, comments, or compliments. Without that, of course, it would be very difficult to have an annual report, to have information which indicates their level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction with several aspects of the Council services. So I think it's important to recognise the customer focus aspect of this report. I also have to recognise the improved culture, certainly within our staff, in terms of recording, listening to customers and recording the information as accurate as possible to enable, certainly my job, to analyse and interpret that information within this report. I'm quite happy to take some questions, but just to give you sort of the structure of the report, I think for anyone reading it for the first time, we have remained consistent in terms of its structure, in that it provides the background about definition of a complaint. It clarifies the three-stage process, the current three-stage process of the complaints procedure. It certainly explains the role of the Ombudsman, and that is, of course, beyond the internal complaints procedure within the Council. It also gives some examples of learning from complaints, which is what it's all about at the end of the day. And it also sets out some of the changes that have happened locally since last year, and the national changes that are nearly upon us in terms of complaints handling. And I'm sure we'll be addressing that in the second report. The key headlines, if I can take you to the report itself, is very much, if we are looking at the overall assessment, is exactly as the BBC has it, I should say. Because, yes, there has been an overall increase in the total number of customer feedback, quite significant, from 326 last year to 629. And as I predicted, in fact, at the last committee, you will recall that I did suggest that with the increase in the promotion for service users to use the complaints process to make complaints, the improved recording practices of staff, I certainly anticipated that there would be this increase in the number of complaints. And I think the figures bear that in mind. And we should not worry about that because apart from any sensational interpretations we might place on the volume, I think it's important to look at what actually they mean to the Council. Again, what we have is a significant number increase in the number of recorded compliments. And that is a lot that we owe to customers for taking the time to write or even to telephone and to compliment the work of staff. And it's, as I have said, it's something that it must not be understated, particularly at a time when resources and services are stretched and staff are operating in very difficult circumstances. We also, part of our best practice, although it is not strictly part of the main complaints process, we have a significant number of customers who raise concerns, who chose to raise their issues as concerns rather than complaints, without going through the procedure. And it's important to provide some transparency about how we have listened to those concerns and to reflect that within the report.
Can I maybe just stop you there and see if any councillors have any questions on what you've discussed so far?
Sure.
I mean, obviously, I'm very pleased to see this report here. I feel it's quite an in-depth report and it's necessary that is the case, but I know that there'll be a number of members wishing to ask some questions. And I think Councillor Dryborough, you were first.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Chair. That is a quite in-depth report, and there was only a couple of things that I wanted to ask about with regard, complaints and comments that you actually said, and also one other thing. But perhaps on the bottom of page 7 of the copy that everybody got and the complaint procedure, where it says sometimes a customer will say, I want to complain when they're requesting a service. For example, I want to complain about potholes in my road, which is a lot of the complaints that we get as local elected members, or I want to complain about a local trader, albeit it would be outside our remit. If it was I want to complain about the potholes on my road for the third time and nothing's been done about it, is that then classed as a complaint, or are you still saying that it is a service request? The other thing I'd like to ask Judix is that there will be the same person complainer who complains regularly on several issues as opposed to just the one issue. And how many would you include in that 600 and odd?
Can I ask you to use your microphone? Sorry.
The answer to the question is if someone is reported a pothole repair for the third time, it's definitely a complaint. We're not here to rationalise or to argue with the complaint. If the complaint says it's a complaint, it's a complaint. And I think that's important a distinction to make. I think in terms of people, repeated complaints, we're trying to get away from the individuals, from the behaviour. We try to look at the issues. If the issues are there and it is a reason for the council to respond, for the service to respond, that will be a complaint. I think it's important for us to ensure that we leave the customer with the satisfaction of a response. Now, it may well be that that response is not satisfactory, but I think it's important that we do that.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, Chair, apologies for my lateness, and we seem to be at item 6 now. An interesting item, and it is a copious report, some 50 pages long. And it's difficult to get a grasp of just exactly what the complaint is, because what it doesn't deal with, and Judix referred to it in his verbal remarks, is the substantive issues that are contained within the report. What it does is it deals with performance but doesn't give the substantive issues in terms of what the complaints were throughout the period. And, you know, if I've got this wrong in terms of what we should be looking at to learn lessons, then I will stand corrected, but I don't think we have. If we take, for an example, the SPSO that puts out their annual report, and they refer to the cases, and cases that then are referred on to the Parliament, but they do it in a way that the individual is anonymous, or individuals are anonymous. So in this respect, I would like to see an indication of the type of complaints that are coming forward. Archie referred to, you know, what is potholes, which is exempt, but it may not be the potholes that's the issue. It may be the process that is the issue, in terms of how long that person has been complaining, why has the complaint not been addressed, adhered to, or whatever. But you will not get that from this report that is here before us without some indication of the substantive issues and reference to that being in the body of the report. That in itself would then lead us to, you know, the learning process. I don't know how many of the elected members have been involved in the process of making complaints, but it can be tedious for the individual if you go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then you go, if the person is still unhappy or dissatisfied, they then have to go to the SPSO, and there's reference to it in here. Chair, I apologise if I'm taking your time or the committee's time, but it's important in terms of the report, because the report is difficult to find anything that you would find issue with without the substantive issues being reported in here. And there is no indication in that, you know, and the person can be anonymous in that respect. As one who has advocated on behalf of a number of people in the ward, then I find the process very frustrating in terms of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And indeed, you tend to lose or the complainant tends to be so frustrated that they give up on the complaint well before the process is exhausted. And that does not come out in the annual report. So these are issues, Chair, I would hope that we can get contained within the report, as this is the draft.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. I mean, my understanding is that that's the way that things have to be recorded at this present moment in time, although I do believe it's going to change. And I do understand that when the SPSO do make recommendations, then those recommendations are fed back through the Policy and Resources Committee. But you've asked some legitimate questions. So, Judith, could you answer Councillor Scobie's questions, please?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question from Councillor Scobie, but happy to endorse your reply, Chair, because, you know, that is a requirement at the moment in terms of how we present the information. But changes are upon us, and of course, from April of next year, the next annual report, that will be a requirement for us to detail those issues and, you know, what actions happen as a result of that. We have to also pay due attention to ensure that, you know, we don't identify, I mean, it's racist, identify, you know, individuals. You don't necessarily have to put their names. I think it's important that we reflect that. We pay attention to that, particularly from a data protection point of view. I'm very conscious about the fact that I think we can sometimes, you know, reflect a lot more the detail, the substance, as you said. But there is a danger. There is also the risk of identifying individuals. And right now, the advice from the SPSO, from the Ombudsman, is await the prescriptions that we will provide, that we're providing, in order to provide much more substance to on the issues of complaints and the actions and the learning that will follow from them.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, please, Chair, and thank you for it. And I'm grateful for your response in terms of what the SPSO has said. The SPSO, you know, let me say in a different life. I sat in industrial tribunals and there were two processes. One was if you qualified in terms of the process, you could win an unfair dismissal or the second part was on the substantive issue, that you could win an industrial tribunal on the grounds of unfairness. The SPSO does not deal with the substantive issue. It deals with whether indeed the process has been correctly carried out and does not deal with the complaint. But in this report, it does not deal with the substantive issues, notwithstanding what Judith said, because I did say in my lead-in that the person or persons can be anonymous, as indeed the annual report from the SPSO does cover, because they do refer to cases in their annual report where the person is not identified. And I don't think we need to wait until the legislation comes in for next year's annual report. This is a draft report. We can take it on board and do it for this year without having to wait on the legislation changing, and then we get that type of report. We could do it now and be ahead of the game if we were to put in the substantive, because then the members could see, just what kind of cases are coming forward, how they're being dealt with, whether they're being dealt with, in an efficient and proficient manner, and that would assist the report. I would suggest, Chair, I'm happy to go with that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Scobie. I'm going to bring Judex in to respond to that. I mean, my understanding is that we have to follow the procedures that are set down at the moment. Judex, could you reply, please?
I'm happy just to reiterate the advice, Chair, because whilst I appreciate that we can delve into and we can certainly present the substantive issues, and to some extent also particularly when we're looking at complaints, we can't provide an exhaustive list. But what we are advised is we can identify complaints which have been significant in terms of learning, and there are a couple of examples in there that we have given in terms of some of the complaints and the impact that it has had in terms of policy and practice. But I accept what Councillor Scobie says, and but I think that I have to keep to the advice and the procedures and the consistency with which we've actually developed that. But what I can do is assure the councillor, the committee, that certainly once the new changes are in, that there will be much more, because of course the report and the contents of the report and the way in which we comply with the prescriptions that the SPSO will lay in terms of what the annual report should contain will be audited by Audit Scotland. So I think it's important to put that in the context. But I'm happy to say, I mean, if you take your advice on that, if it is something that you feel that you would like us to go away and to provide more substantive detailed cases, I have to say I have to be very proportionate about this, because I have to be careful about the risk of identifying individuals simply by virtue of the issues.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Judex, on page 6 of the report, 47 out of 50, the issues that were sent up to the Ombudsman, 3 of them have come back out of jurisdiction. I'm assuming that means they can't rule on them. If I'm wrong in that, correct me. But what happens to those 3? Because that's 3 out of 10. That's 30% of the things that were sent up the road. Do we then investigate them internally? What happens after that part of the process, or do they just die there and then?
Yeah, happy to answer that, Chair. The complaints out of jurisdiction means that it is not within the remit of the Ombudsman and should neither have been within the remit of the Council to deal with. Okay? Now, but where complaints actually are out of jurisdiction, it is open to the service. It is open to the service to negotiate any resolution with the customer in that respect. The complaints procedure is not engaged. It's not engaged. We can only deal with complaints that are within, that deals with the functions and the duties of the Council, and that is going to be within the remit of the Ombudsman to scrutinise should that complaint reach his office.
Councillor Ferguson, do you need to come back, or are you happy with the response?
Yeah, but it obviously causes me great concern is that there is no avenue for us then to. Well, there is an avenue, but it's one that we can take on our own initiative. There's no formal process for us where we have to take account of it. If I'm picking up right, Judex, if I'm wrong, correct me. But that to me is a worry that in those three instances, which were deemed sufficient to go to the Ombudsman, we kind of deal with formally within the council process. That's a worry for me.
Judex, can you respond?
If I can just add, Chair, I mean, at the end of the day, very often we will take on a complaint, and it's important to be very clear. When you're getting into the complaints procedure, we have to be sure that the rights to the complainant that is afforded to a complainant to access the Ombudsman for an external review is available. But in many cases, if we take the complaint and it goes to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman will adjudicate on that in terms of whether that complaint, they can actually make any judgment. An example of that is license complaints about licensing decisions, complaints about particular aspects of planning. And the Ombudsman are very clear, where I think genuinely the Council will always want to try and assess, to try and resolve matters. But at the end of the day, we will exhaust, once the procedure of the Council is exhausted and goes to the Ombudsman, the only recourse to appealing the decision of the Ombudsman is through judicial review. That's the only redress that is available to the complainant.
Thank you. I know Councillor Drybread, you went back in, but I've got a couple of first-time speakers so I'm going to allow them to speak first. I've got Councillor Witts, then Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to compliment Mr. Paul on his comprehensive and interesting report. It occurred to me, however, as I went through it, is there any information regarding internal complaints within the Council?
I'm happy to answer that, Chair, in the sense that internal complaints dealing with staff, and particularly HR matters, disciplinaries, are not matters for the complaints procedure to report on because of the confidentiality that is attached to that particular process, and also to the individual employee concerned.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 34, one of the points, and that is where it says, where has been caused to uphold complaints, we have learnt from the process. Can you give me an example of what you've learnt and where it would be recorded that we can actually evidence it for ourselves, the various points that you have learnt from such complaints? And then on page 46, where we're talking about the year ahead in item 8, designing and delivering training to staff in the new standards and approach. Will this be done by an independent outside body, or is it an internal process that we go through? On page 47, I must say on the fourth paragraph, where it talks about increasing from 18 to 97 compliments, that is some achievement, and one that should be recorded and made public. And finally, it would be on page 54, where we're talking about complaints per locality. Is it possible to see each one of those areas broken down into the various complaints?
Judex, could you answer that? I mean, I don't know if you've got a record of them all, but I'm sure Councillor Wood will be able to repeat them if he needs to.
I'll certainly take the easy one, which is the compliments one, because of course, yes, of course we should promote that. Why should it be that when things go wrong that we report on that and we publicise that? The local citizens are entitled to know that we appreciate and we recognise the effort they put in to appreciate, to compliment staff, and so that is something we'll do. I think in terms of giving substantial information, the details of those complaints that you mentioned to show exactly where lessons have been learned, it's something we can always do. The problem is how much do you go into? We use the 5 drivers of the key drivers of MORI to determine satisfaction, simply because, customers should expect the satisfaction with those 5 key areas that we've specified around delivery. They expect to receive services by the standards that those services operate. Okay. And if they don't, then obviously that results in a complaint. The failure to meet any of these 5 drivers, whether it's timeliness, whether it's service delivery, etc., that is what it's important for us to say, what are the actual complaints about? Are they about the service delivery, which clearly, notably in this report, you've got 2 clear, we're very clear there are 2 key areas in which we have to focus attention. One is on the service delivery aspect. It's very difficult to go through, I'm sure it's practical, to go through every complaint and identify the issue. What we've got to do at the end of the day is to aggregate that and to look at what exactly the complaints are saying. What are the key issues? And what are the key aspects of our service delivery, of what we do, that the complaints are about? In this particular case, overwhelmingly, it is clear that service delivery is a major concern. The level of dissatisfaction, the level of complaints around service delivery, in whichever way you want to describe it, whether it's about quality, whether it's about how the service is delivered, that is something that's very difficult to do.
Chair.
Thank you. Before I let you back in, I think Councillor Wood has actually asked a very legitimate question based on giving us an example of the improved learning that's been put in place to following a complaint that's been upheld. On page 34, it clearly stipulates that. I think it's not an unreasonable request for an example of what that would be and how it's been put into practice, without naming any names or individuals, etc. I do think that there is a possibility that we should be able to get that information. Can't have it for today, maybe we could have it for the next meeting.
I could refer you to page 15, Chair, of the page 15 of 50 of the report. When, again, as I said, without being exhaustive, on the list, on the number of complaints, we give a very clear example here. And again, protecting the identity of the individuals involved here is to ensure that we can look at complaints. And here's a complaints about social work services and the issues and the learning and the impact of that complaints and the action plan that social work themselves have put into place in terms of remedy. A couple of complaints here. The second one is a complaint around planning and environment services. So we do give some examples, but if it is the wish of the committee that we identify each and every complaint and actually show examples of what we've learned.
No, we weren't suggesting that we should get each and every complaint. We were just looking for an example of a corrective measure that you had put in place, which would therefore hopefully enable that no further complaint had to come forward with that particular same issue.
Happy to accommodate that, Chair. Happy to accommodate that.
All right, thank you. I think it would be helpful if you could do that. Now, Councillor Driver, you wanted back in. Sorry, Councillor Wood, did you want to come back?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair. It was with the last point with regard to concerns per locality and the breakdown from education, social work, whatever. I think as ward members, we would like to have an idea of what's actually happening with it in our specific area, and it would help us to maybe understand from other information that we get just how we are performing within that particular area.
Happy to take that on board, Councillor.
Thank you.
Could I ask Mr Haswell to bring that in? Because obviously that should be reported to the Service Committee as well, so we should be able to tie that up. But Mr Haswell?
That was certainly what I understood Jurex to say, was that there were reports to service committees on complaints about specific services. So if the Service Committee gets a report based on localities, that should answer your question. But if the information is available, we'll just get it to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Driver, you've been very patient.
Well, that's all right, Chair. I've learned to be that with you. I'm just coming back to what Councillor Scobie mentioned earlier, and I do have to say I do agree with a lot of what he says. In fact, most of it what he actually says. And I think try to find a way forward in what's actually happened here. Obviously, at the moment there is no requirement under the standards to present any cases forward. And I'm just wondering if it's an option for perhaps in 6 months' time to come for Judix to come forward and maybe take 2 or 3 complaints that he feels that the learning has actually been huge on the council for us as members to learn as well how we actually deal with that particular thing, and have it as a report at one of the audit and risk committees as saying, here's the learning that we've learned from 2 or 3 particular cases, so that next year when we get the draft report, which will include the complaints, that we at least we're aware of how we deal with that particular thing.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. I wouldn't go as far as to suggest that we have a seminar on anything like this. However, I do agree that it would be very useful if you could maybe come forward with 3 different individual cases, and then we could look at from start to finish of that complaint, because I think that would be beneficial to members as much as anything else. I think that would be helpful. Good idea, Councillor Driver. Councillor Ferguson, very quickly.
Yes, I noted something Councillor Woods brought up, and it was about the compliments, if I picked them up right, coming back into the council. And I just wondered how proactive the service areas are, or in fact, are some of them aware, because it doesn't seem a hell of a lot of compliments coming in, given we're a 24/7, 52 weeks a year service. And I would suggest there might be under-reporting here. I mean, I'm pleased to see the number, was it 90 or something like that? But how many times does that happen? You know, can we get some sort of assurance that the service committees are actually reporting into the centre?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, for that. My only concern about that would be if it was to be weighed up as a percentage against the number of complaints to the number of actual compliments, that you may end up people coming forward suggesting that it looked extremely poor. But I understand where you're coming from, and maybe Judix could take that on board and maybe come back to us with that. Can we move to the recommendations, please? Oh, Councillor Scobie.
It may cover in the recommendations, but however, I'm grateful for Archie, Councillor Driver, and coming back and at least supporting what I was saying, or by the majority of what I'm saying, and I thought I got that degree of support from Councillor Wood as well. Can I push my luck here, Chair, and say, you know, if it's possible to come back within 6 months on 3 examples, that we include it, this is a draft report, that we include the 3 examples in this report. We would not be acting ultra vires, although I will bow to the greater knowledge of Mr. Haswell in this one. If we were acting ultra vires from a legal aspect, I don't believe we will be including that. We may not be following the guidelines, but I'm quite sure that the SPSO or the external auditor will not chastise us. Indeed, I would suggest that they may give credit to us for doing it, for being ahead of the game. So, you know, if it's possible within 6 months, could it be possible to include 3 examples, at least at some of the way, in starting to identify the cases without, you know, identifying the individuals that remain anonymous, and that we include it in this report? And if the kudos are worth going for in terms of what's being said in the report, then equally we can get that from the SPSO as well, that we're ahead of the legislation.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. I actually have no issue with that whatsoever. However,
I'm happy to accept that, Chair. I'm happy to enhance the report with examples, as Councillor Scobie suggests, before we actually publish this report. It is a draft report.
Members, I mean, I think that would be helpful. Yeah. Okay, can we move to the recommendations, and we'll just add that part in as well. Okay, members, I take it we're happy with the recommendations to accept the report with the addition of the 3 examples. Yes? Members? Yes? Okay, there are some nodding of heads. That won't be recorded though, so comments would be good. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7 of the report. Judex, you're taking us through item 7 on the report as well. Are you happy just to go for members just to go straight to questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Members? Councillor Dryborough?
Chair, I've actually looked at some of this in quite detail, especially with regards to RSLs and how they deal with their complaints and things like that. And the RSLs, I believe, in Dumfries and Galloway are already on the two-stage appeal because of their ombudsman and things like that. And I actually think this is the way to go with a two-stage appeal. Three-stage appeals, sometimes a lot of the information gets messed up and missed in the minutiae of all the emails and phone calls and things like that with regards to the complaint itself. I think this is the way to go. And looking at the recommendations, the recommendation is to agree the Scottish Public Service model. And I've got absolutely no problem in actually introducing the two-stage model rather as the three-stage model as it is at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Dryborough. I do think it's a step in the right direction, I've got to say. Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, Chair, and it must be a step in the right direction, given where we were at and the work of Judix's department in terms of departmental complaints and so forth and so on. So it's a move in the right direction, but it is cumbersome in terms of the stage 1, stage 2, and now stage 3. And I often wonder where Judix's department comes in terms of that whole process. So I think even the stage 2 is a cumbersome way, because the RSLs, at least I know of one RSL that moved from a stage 3 or 3-stage process into a 1-stage. And those, in my experience, making the complaint are very cynical of the whole process if you go a stage 1, stage 2, or anything above a stage 1, in terms of, is it the police, looking into their own complaints type attitude from the public. So I would prefer if we could move to just a 1-stage, a stage 1, then it's direct. If the person is still dissatisfied or unhappy, that they can go to the SPSO. I must say I'm no enamoured with the SPSO in terms of that they just deal with the process and not the substantive issue, but that's a separate issue in that respect. So I would prefer that we were moving towards a 1-stage where the person makes a complaint that's only investigated once, without then the investigators type attitude, because that's what will happen in a stage 2 process or 2-stage process. I would much prefer, if it's possible, to move just to 1 stage, and then if the person's unhappy, they have the ability. It cuts down time, and time being what frustrates the individuals, in my experience.
Councillor Scobie, I'm actually not sure that that's possible under this particular report. However, I will allow Judith to answer your question.
Thank you, Chair. I think the straightforward answer to Councillor Scobie's question is that this is a prescription. This is a statute-based complaints procedure. The SPSO is empowered under the Public Service Reform Act and also amendments to the SPSO Act to have set up the Standards Complaints Authority to establish this procedure. There is very little flexibility in terms of the model that's been offered. It's in fact the guidance clearly states that we can't even amend the stages of the complaints, the definition of the complaint, the timescales that have been set in that. I'm afraid to say that we have to comply, just as I know all my colleagues across the other authorities, to this requirement.
Okay, I'm moving to the recommendations, members. I don't think there's anybody got any further questions. Oh, Councillor Wood, you wanted to ask a question?
Just a small question on page 95, where within the complaint handling procedure, it talks about it is important that such extensions do not become the norm. How do we endeavour to make sure that it doesn't become the norm? Can you give us an assurance on how we're going to do that? And also on the other bit where it's talking about closing the complaint at frontline resolution stage, and you are not obliged to write to the customer. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that either, and would like very much to see that embedded in the report, that it would be.
I'm sorry, Councillor Wood, but this isn't our document to change. I mean, we can't actually change this document. I understand that you have concerns about some of the wording in the document, but it is not our document to change.
And it's not open to consultation either, that we can't put recommendations forward?
I would suggest if you're unhappy with it, you might wish to make your representation directly to Scottish Government, I would have thought. However, Judex?
I think the answer to Councillor Wood's question in relation to this aspect is that wherever the response to resolution to stage 1, look, wherever it's best practice, it's never against any law for us to adopt best practice and to ensure that if the complainant requires a response, we shall give that response. And whether that is in writing or not, I think we owe a duty to ensure that we provide that to the customer. I can't remember your second question.
It was regarding the wording. However, I'm moving to the recommendations. Okay. Members, happy to agree? Thank you. Thank you, Judith. We're moving on to item 8, Data Protection Action Plan Progress Report. And Aaron, you're taking us through this report? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So, you understand what the report's about. It's a progress report on the Data Protection Action Plan. Quick recap for you. The IC auditors were here in June for 3 days. They conducted their audit and provided us 41 recommendations. We broke them recommendations into 2 stages, basically 2 3-month periods. And in the first 3 months, we committed to achieving 19 actions, and we achieved 22 overall. 2 of the 19 originally have not been achieved, but we're confident that they will be tied up in the next few weeks. We're looking to basically take this forward over the next 3 months with the remaining 16 actions. There's 3 that will not be completed until September due to capacity and in most cases cost. We're confident we will be on target. Once the report, the IC action plan is completed, it will be a case of moving to other developments that we currently feel are probably required, and we need to look into that and what they are, and then we'll be moving to our own audit process where we can actually audit compliance with council departments to make sure they're still meeting the requirements set out in this plan. It's mentioned there about report to the ICO. I've already been in contact with the ICO and they are very happy with our progress, and will not be making contact with them until April this year. And April will be the time when we provide a further update to you. And basically we're looking for the completion targets to be met, apart the 3 actions which will be outstanding until September.
Thank you, Aaron. It is good to see that some progress has been made on this. I mean, obviously we've still got a way to go, but at least we're making progress. I have 2 speakers intimated they wish to speak, Councillor Drybrough and then Councillor McKee.
So, thanks, Chair. I mean, the first one's quite easy, I think, to answer. It's one I asked the last time on page 117A16, where it talks about social engineering. And you gave us a response the last time, and I just, if you can remind me what social engineering means in the aspect of data protection.
Social engineering in regards to data protection is whereby members of the public would phone up the council or turn up at a reception centre and basically try to get information out of the members of staff. So, for example, you may have a husband who comes and says, and I'm looking to ask for information about my wife, looks all innocent, but actually they've been divorced for many years. There's a big dispute, and he's trying to get information to take advantage of.
And your next question, Councillor?
Chair, it's more on the process of bringing this report here. With regards a press release that was released last week, saying that the actual report is going to be accepted by the committee, and it was yourself that put the actual press release out through the communications department. I'm not concerned that decision has actually been made already before it comes to committee, and in the process we're looking at an action plan here that thankfully has 19 actions completed, 5 of which were brought forward from 2013. However, I need to make sure, as an elected member, that people in Dumfries and Galloway and staff are confident that this action plan is going to ensure that their data is protected. And the way to do that, of course, is through the scrutiny that we have on this committee. I don't think it was appropriate for a press release to go out before this actually came to committee.
Thank you, Councillor Dryburgh. Councillor McKee?
Oh, Councillor Dryburgh pinched my first question. But perhaps on the next block, you tell me what the senior agents are. But on A14, ensure staff in data protection roles receive appropriate training as a priority. I think an attitude problem in there with some staff, where you give them the training and then they sort of please themselves how they conduct themselves, where they're carrying likes of papers, for example, not under a secure method outside the office. And I think that it's got to be spelled out to them that their attitude has got to change. They have got a responsibility to protect that information. If they didn't like doing that, then there's a door.
Councillor
just say goodbye.
Maybe I could respond to Councillor McKee rather than put Mr. Linden in that position.
Well, that's right. I appreciate
that's clearly the case. And the issue on data protection, you're only as good as the people that you have, and we must train them. They must understand the requirements of the Data Protection Act, and they must comply with any issues that the council bring forward, any mechanisms that are put in place to ensure that they comply with the Act. The unfortunate thing is sometimes human error creeps in, but we must do all that we can as a local authority to ensure that staff are equipped to comply with the Data Protection Act. And you're absolutely right, but I wouldn't like Mr. Linden to be put in that position. Just now.
No, I appreciate where you're coming from, and I wouldn't like to put you in that position either, but it is, I think there is an attitude problem there at times, where people have got to recognise they've got a responsibility, whether they like it or not. But where's the senior agent? London.
It's not a complicated question. In all honesty, I contacted DG Direct and Care Call, and the management response is what they provided to me. So essentially they will be the two principal officers in those departments.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie then, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure it's data protection is like a minefield, and whether we're able to grasp exactly what all the complexity of it is within this report, I would hazard a guess and say no. We can only deal with individuals and then respond by our own experience. And part of my experience, and I'm glad we've moved away, and indeed Lyndon gave advice that was changed, and I'm delighted to say it was changed, in that we were getting correspondence back as elected members with no names and reference numbers and so forth and so on. And I think alongside this, under data protection, then we also, as elected members, are data controllers and registered as data controllers. And it is very much on what we do with the information that is the important part to this piece of the legislation, because I note on page 123, and I take it this does refer to it in terms of corporate protocol, then I'm still having difficulty with identifying some of the cases that are coming forward, because not all staff seem to understand or aware of the data protection and they seem to think, well, I'll just cover it by saying, oh, well, we're in breach of data protection, when in fact they are not in breach of the data protection by disclosing certain information. So I think we need to strengthen that. But alongside that, as to what Councillor McKee is saying, you know, it is a serious offence, and I think we're on to the third one that I have know of breach of data protection in terms of individuals, detail and how that all came about. So I think we need to strengthen the action plan and the processes. And I see Mr. Haspel, I have had this discussion with Mr. Haspel in terms of some of our departments and the processes or lack of processes that exist within the department. So I think that for the audit committee, then we've got to be have the reassurance that we are dealing with any breach and the nature of that breach, and that we are in control of that. But I refer to, so there are two issues. One, I'm delighted that we've moved, at least we're starting to, you know, members are recognised as part of that process, and we can identify the issues under the protocol by name. The other is the breaches that have already happened, and that we are on top of that. We are in control in terms of the processes without dealing with individuals. And the third one is to the redactions, and without referring to individual cases, then equally, this is one by the Information Commission Officer in terms of what can be released and can make sense. And I'm looking at Judix in the complaints process, that what is provided, and it says here, under that, ensure that robust process for redaction exempt data is included in the corporate subject, where what is being redacted then does not make sense to the individual who is making the complaint. And we've got to make sure that, as it says at the bottom of that, as the management response, the subject access request procedures and guidance will include a robust process for redaction of exempt data, a process for quality assurance, and a requirement that a record of what data has been removed and for what reason it is logged and responded. Again, my experience has been that has not followed the redaction, and I don't know if anyone has been involved in redactions, but it has not followed, and it may not be following what Mr. Haspel referred to in complying with the Act, but that may be for the ICO to respond in that respect. And I see Judix pointing to where my answer might be. I hope there is an answer, but that if we are being serious about this, and I'm sure we are, then these are issues. As I said at the beginning, the DPA is a minefield and difficult just to pick up on that. But there are three issues, Chair. No doubt there'll be an answer from officials.
Aaron, can you answer Councillor Scobie, please?
On the redaction aspect in itself, we've now developed a policy for that, dealing with subject access requests in themselves. There's lots of guidance from the ICO as well. And I'll be honest with you, the aspect in regards to information maybe not making sense, that can happen. Basically, under a subject access request, under the Data Protection Act, people are entitled to their personal data, and that's it. So, for example, if I make a statement, if I write down something that says about my feelings, and then I say something about you, you're not entitled to see what I've written beforehand, if you like. In the same sense, if I put in an email which includes information about you, and I start talking about a business process, if I thought you were aware of it, I could share that with you, but I'm not entitled to, I don't have to. So in some cases, you could actually have a document full of full of writing, and the individual would get 2 lines. Yes, that should be in the process. The letter that is provided, the covering letter, should explain this case and confirm that reductions are because of in some areas. But there's no duty to actually tell people we are withholding information and what we're withholding.
Thank you. Mr. Haswell, do you want to deal with?
Councillor Scobie mentioned two specific breaches. Without going into the detail, can I give an assurance that there was a team of people put in to look at backroom processes within the service affected. That team of people have made a number of recommendations regarding normal practice or good practice, best practice within an office environment. There's an action plan and that's currently being worked through. So that was addressed, as Councillor Scobie has alluded to. Redactions is a difficult thing, but provided that we give the reasons why the information has been redacted, then there's a right of appeal to the ICO, obviously.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for this report, Aaron. I'm referring to Code A19 on page 117. And it's about the standard confidential agreement being developed. I remember very clearly a number of, well, more years than I'd like to remember, I actually signed that the day I joined Dumfries and Galloway Council. So where is the need to actually re-sign it, or is that embedded in modern thinking? Or are there certain services who didn't do that as a matter of course? And if that's the case, then it should be a council-wide, it has to be a council-wide thing, but we should be actually saying to the departments who haven't done it, bring them up to speed, because the rest, social work education, for example, had that as standard clauses, as I remember correctly. Mr. Haswell's nodding. So it's a bit misleading to say that we're needing to do it now. It's I think what we're needing to say here, somewhere in here, is that we need to bring all departments into this process so that the day people sign on, they sign the confidentiality clause. Because there's a mass duplication here if this stays the way it is. Right now, and I can see departments implementing this and getting everybody to re-sign it, which is just, quite frankly, a waste of time and paper. It's already signed. It stays with you for the entirety of your service.
Aaron, can you answer?
Yep. And honestly, there was little information to say that a number of staff hadn't signed it. The issue came when someone signed it 25 years ago when they first started and haven't been reminded of the requirements of it, shall we say. So it's, from this one, it was a case of we will catch everybody who hasn't signed it, if that is the case, and the small cases we did find, but we're also reminding them of the responsibilities and adding additional responsibilities which they will have probably gained over the 25 years that they haven't signed it. It's likely that this will be a thing that will be signed on a regular basis. Well, I'll rephrase that. It will be signed again and again, but we tried to keep the process to maybe a 5-year period or something like that, because it is an onerous process, but people, staff, need to be reminded of the requirements and any new additions that have developed since last time we signed it.
Thank you. I have one councillor wishing to come in on the back of that, and I do know, Councillor Witts, that you've been particularly patient, so if you don't mind being patient for another couple of minutes. Councillor McKee.
Thank you. Lyndon has partly answered it, but I'm not happy that 5 years should be the re-signing. I would have preferred it to be annually, to be re-signed annually. I think people have got to be reminded of this confidentiality agreement, that they have an obligation regarding confidentiality of people's business. And I would like to see it being an annual re-signing process rather than 5 years.
Aaron, can you answer that, please?
I think to commit to that would be, it's a huge resource I mean, we're talking 8,000 people, every member of staff. If anything, I think we maybe should look at it on a risk-based assessment, and based on the level of dealings with data protection and their positions, it might be a case where we could get them to assign it on a yearly basis. For example, I'm sure, in fact, I know revenues and benefits, for example, they have their own confidential agreement, which they do sign on an annual basis anyway. So I think it was a tiered approach, if you like.
Just on the back of that, I mean, I'm presuming everybody has PDRs, personal development reviews, on an annual basis, and surely it should be reiterated at that point in time about the confidentiality agreement. I think it's important that that's addressed at that point in time. Councillor Witts.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at Code B23 on page 119, and I'm pleased to see this here regarding this secure holding of confidential waste. For from a member's point of view, I have to say that I'm often concerned about that as I stagger in here with my bag of confidential waste, after having suitably perused it, of course. Sometimes it has to be left in the corridor, and this is by no means a criticism of reception staff. And it causes me some anxiety that could be there for some time. And I trust that the lockable cabinets will perhaps be on the ground floor as well. I don't know what's proposed, but I'm pleased that this has been given some attention.
Thank you for that information, Councillor Witts. It's quite alarming that there's confidential information being left in the corridor, but I'm sure Mr Haswell will be able to address that. PDQ?
Immediately. Surprised, not to say concerned that it's happened. I wasn't aware members were bringing confidential waste in and leaving it in a corridor. I had no knowledge of that. But it'll be addressed immediately.
Councillor Witts?
I have to say that I always notify staff, say this is a bag of confidential waste. If I'm feeling extraordinarily strong, I'll take it upstairs, but it is something that has. I'm glad that I raised it because obviously it needs to be highlighted.
Thank you. Can we move to the recommendations, please? Members? Agreed? Thank you.
Can you get clarity on the press release then, why it was made out without coming to committee?
Councillor Dryburgh, my understanding is I made a few comments on request on information that was already in the public domain. If you want to discuss it after the committee, more than happy to do so. On that happy note, we're going to break for lunch, back in half an hour.
And the Council's final accounts for 2011-12 were presented to full Council at the end of November, and full Council deferred the detailed consideration of the Auditor's report to this committee. In terms of the Council themselves, an unqualified opinion, but the role and remit of the external auditor extends well beyond the accounts and the financial statements, and the auditors have identified a number of key risk areas and also areas for improvement for the Council over the upcoming period, and those are reflected in the action plan at the end of the external auditor's report. But at that stage, we would just hand over to Cameron to talk us through the report, please.
Thanks, Paul. Paul's correct, actually. Unqualified opinion, which is good, that's excellent. That unqualified opinion was also slightly delayed in that we did have an objection to the accounts from the Lower Burn Community Council concerning the Common Good Fund, and once we looked at that area, we didn't feel it was something that would prevent us signing off unqualified. So that was also good news. Break-even position, you got your efficiency savings last year. The challenges that Paul mentioned that we talk about in the report around the savings and service impact, of course, something you've got going forward. Welfare Reform Bill, the police and fire reform, of course, which is changing the status of the police services, and that does affect you because it's one of your services rather than a separate board. We also touch on the social work services, and of course we talk about that one we're all concerned about, equal pay, providing for equal pay and the contingent liability around that. Chair, I wouldn't plan to actually go into any more details. I know you've talked about this, but I'm very happy to take any questions that members may have.
Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks, Chair. And as usual, I just go straight to the action plan from the actual report, and the report is quite clear and concise in what it actually says. And I'm just looking at a couple of particular areas within the action plan itself, and one of them is the welfare reforms. Of course, I believe that we will see some huge effects of the welfare reform once they come in fully in March, April this year. And looking at the Universal Credit Pilot Scheme, which 3 of the local authorities are actually doing, and we are one of them, it's just basically, can you give us an update on how that's actually going, if you've done a particular audit on that? And I might be asking the wrong person here to actually do it, but that would be most helpful. The issue with regards equal pay, which you've mentioned in your pre-statement there, obviously causes us some concern about the ongoing issues, and there's potential cost to that, and an increased cost depending on how certain equal pay claims actually go. How confident are you that we're doing the right thing in that particular area? And finally, in the management of social work services, it says that the operational implications of this recommendation are currently being considered and be submitted to Social Work Services Committee December 2012, January 2013. And again, it's about the business and financial management systems that's actually in there, and we've seen an overspend within that budget itself, albeit it's been helped by policy and resources committee. Is there anything that we should be concerned about with regards to where we see the action plan going?
If I take each in turn, if I may, the universal credit situation, no. For the member, we haven't done any specific work on that, so I can't comment on that. But like you, I do have concerns about the impact of some of the actions there, and one of the principal areas I do have some concern about, and I take this not from the point of the individual, because it's different for the individual, but from the council point of view, is the benefits going to the individual before they then come to the council, and whether they find their way to the council at all in some cases. And that does worry me from the council's point of view in terms of your finances. In terms of equal pay, you're right, a significant area, and that's why what you've got is a contingent liability, you're right, rather than providing under accounting requirements. If we knew, had even a decent idea, we could put some money aside. It's the big unknown, and you are no different than any other council, as you're aware. So, and I'm content that it has got enough focus by the council. It's something you are well cited on, something you look at on a regular basis at developments and what's happening there. So I'm satisfied with that. The final one on, if I may, the social work services, we may make reference in page 134, of course, obviously see some of the areas there. My understanding is that report is going to the next social work committee to be discussed in some detail. I will, of course, have an interest in the actions that then flow from that to see if these are appropriately focused to overcome the position you've just touched about the unknown overspends, etc.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, and it's on the same subject, and grateful to hear from the gentleman that you will be overseeing the report that's going to the social work service. But in the bold print, what you say is this current review of financial management and related business arrangements raises concerns around a number of matters noted above. The next step for the council will require clear leadership and commitment to implementing both improved and existing arrangements. Notwithstanding that we're getting a report to the next meeting, I think, and I go back to one of the very critical reports we received from external audit some years ago, where this was identified again in terms of leadership, and whether you have any powers. Should you not be satisfied with the council in terms of its leadership, let it be at official level or indeed at elected member level to implement. It's a well-known fact within the members sitting here that I moved and got very little support for a short-term monthly meeting to try and get control of the situation, and that was rejected by all. In fact, I think I had to note my dissent on it. But this is a major issue for this council, and we cannot highlight enough the leadership, whether that be at official level or at elected member level, the issue here. And I would like to hear more, not just that you're going to oversee a report. I would like to know what your powers are. And similar to welfare reform, and again in bold, you say the council should put specific arrangements in place to ensure the welfare reform impact can be planned, coordinated, monitored, and successfully implemented. Well, we are in the process of drawing together the budget for 2013-14, and I think the recommendation was for something like £500,000 to try and deal with this issue in terms of the workload, the response that there would be required to welfare reform. Yet within the proposed budget that we are currently considering, there's something like 250, which falls short of what the recommendations would be, and that's at elected member level. And I just wonder what credence is being paid to this report in terms of the bold print, and whether you would wish to comment at this stage, notwithstanding that the budget has not been set. And there are some who have the view, including myself, that that a great deal more should be going towards the welfare reform process and the implementation of that. I may come back on the governance issues, Chair, but if these two could be.
If I take each in turn, if I may, actually, if we take the social work services point concerning powers, no, I don't have powers. I don't have stop powers or approval powers, and you probably know that, so I don't have that. But what I do have, though, is I have the power to report and report in the public domain as well. And this report, if you take this as an example, this report will be in the public domain, and Audit Scotland are putting them in the public domain this month, I believe. Actually, that happens with all annual reports. So the points that are in 217 to 219 on page 134 will be in the public domain. Having worked in audit and local government for many years, I don't really have the frustration that councils don't take on board what I say, because I guess that, like others, I would throw my toys at the pram a little bit, actually, if it wasn't good enough. But I agree entirely with what you say. The report is just a report. It is the actions that are actually taken that are important. And what's important in all of these cases is that invariably there will be 5 or 6 key things that need to be done. Other things would be nice to do, and I will be interested to see, flowing from the social work services, approval of this report, which I assume may happen sooner rather than later. I'll be looking to see what actions will be taken, so I will be looking at that again.
here that the Council should consider including an annual government statement in its annual account for 2012-13. I welcome this, where I hope it will be a comprehensive report in terms of just how much power that exists within governance, in terms of, and we heard it in earlier debates this morning, in terms of our scrutiny as an audit committee on some of the complaints procedures, some of the documents that were referred to, which are a minimum standard. I have had a word with the member concerned that raised it on one of the items where the document was a minimum standard for this council to determine what kind of service it wants. But, you know, that's under governance. So I would welcome a report from governance if that's what this is implying, because we've had opportunity to review our standing orders, but, you know, it's the whole governance, and there are issues in terms of how members get issues on the agenda, where indeed members cannot get issues on a committee agenda. The only place they can do that is full council, and again there's a governance process there in withdrawal or delegated powers and so forth and so on. So I would welcome this because it's the first indication we have towards that, Chair.
Mr. Haswell? The governance statement, we're looking at the annual governance statement. I think about 4 years ago, we always incorporated a governance statement into the annual accounts. That fell off, I think, on the basis of a recommendation from the previous external auditor, but I'm not going to go further than that. But I welcome the opportunity of bringing that back to members.
Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks for letting me back in, Chair. I'm just coming into Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act. Now, it says quite clearly the implementation date is the 30th of September 2013 here. Now, apparently there was a press release made by the new chair of the Police Authority that any assets that had not been registered to a local authority will be claimed to be his by 1st April 2013. They will go in that way. Now, maybe it's perhaps Alex that we're looking at here to ensure that, you know, we're going along the right way here. We want to make sure our assets are kept, and if there is any sort of financial remuneration to come from that particular thing, we keep it back here in the council as opposed to give it to Scottish Government.
I think, Chairman, thanks for that, Archie. Yeah, the project board has been meeting on a fairly regular basis. The 6 work streams are working well. We have identified the assets to be transferred in terms of buildings, vehicles, human resources and finance. I am anticipating that there will be a report to a meeting of the Police and Fire Committee in January about the entire asset transfer process. There are still negotiations ongoing. The difficulty has been to date that there's been nobody to negotiate with other than people who are in current posts. But there are now directors being appointed. The assistant chief constables, as you're aware, have been appointed just before Christmas. So we have our situation under control at the moment. I think there are a couple of issues about transfers of records and IT issues which we're still negotiating, but these will move forward.
Like yourself, Councillor Dryborough, I look forward to that at our Thursday meeting. Any other members at this time? No? Could we go to the recommendations? Agreed? Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, on the recommendations, could we record, you know, and it has to do with the social work committee, that, you know, and to the response I got to the questions is that, you know, this committee do look for accountability from that, and it's to the specific action that we note that here, because, you know, it's not to take over the responsibility of the social work committee, but it's in terms of this committee to make sure that we are auditing and that we are satisfied with the action being taken by that service committee in terms of accountability and so forth, so that we don't just pay lip service to the report, that as an audit committee we would be looking for the actions to be appropriate on that important issue.
My colleague will just pick it up if that's okay, actually.
This was a local follow-up report on the Maintaining Scotland's Roads, which was an Auditor General report published in February 2011. The original review was just focusing on the condition of the road network in Scotland, the amount of money being spent on road maintenance and how road maintenance was being managed. And as part of our work, we performed during September 2012 using an audit checklist which was provided by Audit Scotland, which was a defined scope, again, given by Audit Scotland. So basically, we found that areas of good practice and areas where we could see that the recommendations made in the original report had been implemented, such as that appropriate consideration of the report had been given by senior council officers and by elected members, that there is a roads asset management plan in place and that there are KPIs that have been set and that are being monitored. From the report, we did find 3 recommendations. The first one was around there is an improvement plan that was set up by the council, but we found that there'd been limited progress in implementing the actions from these improvement plans. The second one was in relation to data for customer satisfaction, and for secondary performance indicators were limited. Secondary performance indicators are such as pothole repairs and extent of roads resurfacing. The third one was around there being greater collaboration with private sector companies to enable to achieve value for money. So that was the main themes from the report, and I'm happy to take any questions on them.
Councillor McKee.
I hadn't had a moan the day, and no doubt the auditors will tell us it's nothing to do with them. But if you go in the Dumfries bypass from the Glasgow Road to Castle Douglas Road, it's absolutely covered in patches. There was half a dozen holes in that road for about a year. And one day I come down the bypass and here's a great big new patch of tar. Lovely. What was right next to it? Part of one of the holes. They'd left the hole in the road. Now that's the sort of thing you're up against. And it's all right, we could do something about the rain, but who's doing anything about the people that's doing the national roads? It's out with our responsibility, with our care. So they've got a responsibility as well. It's all right criticising us. I think our blocks, everybody can always do better, but they do a pretty good job overall. I know I've reported potholes in the past, and you've got a 3-day target, and generally these 3-day targets are met. Sometimes, probably a couple of days later, the pothole's empty again, and that's maybe something that we need to look at. I believe we have looked at better equipment to improve the maintenance and repairs of holes in the road. But it's not just the councils. I think nationally, I need to look at Transport Scotland, need to look at their own workers.
Thank you, Councillor McKee. There's a couple in your ward that I'll talk to you about later. Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think in the main, when we look at the road action plan, in the main it's very, very much a reactive system rather than a proactive system to dealing with potholes and things like that. And I'm just wondering if you've got anywhere in the action plan to consider things like linesmen or things like that, because one of the issues I certainly see within the rural areas of Dumfries and Galloway is that we used to have these gullies that were dug out every other year, and that tended to keep the water away from the road, which stopped it freezing under the tar, pushing the tar up, and then all of a sudden it thaws and there's a pothole there. So I'm just wondering if there's anywhere in your action plan that you're talking to management within the roads department on and looking at these proactive systems.
The difficulty, I guess, Councillor, is that it was a follow-up report that someone else had completed. So what we were actually doing was looking at the specific actions that had been agreed. So sorry, I can't answer you. I guess it was actually, did the overall initial review look at that? I don't know, because we didn't do it, I'm afraid, sorry.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, we all could be parochial. I don't think that's what the report is actually suggesting that we become, you know, in terms of where the potholes are. I think it's more to do with the issue as contained in 155 and the difficulty that this council, along with many other councillors, where we're, you know, only achieving 63% of road maintenance within the current regime, and I assume that's the same across the whole of Scotland. That's I understand, as an average figure. So we are falling behind, and I would suggest that that figure of 63% is even falling further behind, given the savings that we've got to try and find. Because if any of the members sitting here are dealing with some of the issues within our wards and then across the region, then you're on a priority list. It's touch and go whether some of the issues are ever going to be tackled because of the low budget that this is given against the wider issues. So it's really, you know, whether this council or indeed any other council or the 32 authorities are being given adequate, and I know the stock answer back to this will never be given enough when you look at the backlogged increase of 2.25 billion, which is 1 billion more since 2004. So I just wonder how realistic the report is from the external auditor in terms of, are you hoping to get that 63% increase to something in the 70s, the 80s, or even the 90s, against the backlog of, you know, reducing resources? And really, while it's right, we did have a report went to PH&E and then to the full council policy and resources in terms of changing our procedures from what used to be where it was coal tar and now we use the hot tar. And then there can be, as we do adopt and is recognised in the report, go out to the private sector. But are we ever going to increase that 63% in the real world? And should this be something that's laid at the door of the Scottish Government and governments before them in terms of a realistic figure of settlement against what the work that we got? Because the irony of it all is, it's been reported in the local paper, the amount of compensation we have paid because we have not responded to complaints, and equally, as actually recognised in an earlier report, it's not part of the complaints procedure, potholes. But we're paying the compensation, which exceeds anything here. So it's how realistic is the report?
I think it's realistic in a sense, but what we're following up is what you said you would do yourself, and we're saying what you've got with it. If you're right, I think for all councils it's a difficult situation because you are wrestling every day with a choice of how much you put into each service, because you only have so much money to spend around. And if you have a choice between, you're right, filling a pothole or helping a vulnerable person, then it's for you to determine what it is, but it wouldn't be difficult for me to guess where you would be putting that money. I'm not sure how this whole area gets addressed. Your fellow councillor referred to the trunk roads network, and to be fair to Transport Scotland, they are in the same situation. You may feel they have got more resources at their disposal, but they're in the same situation if you actually look at the money that has been given into the maintenance of the trunk roads as well. And I think the severe weather has an impact on that we actually have been following. For me, do we expect to see that 63% moving? That's not the focus of what we've been looking at. We've been looking at that you've set yourself a number of things to do. Have you actually got there with them? Yeah, you've got there with a number of them. There's others perhaps you could improve. That's the level of the review that we've carried out here. But I can't disagree with anything that the member said.
Page 160, maximising value for money. As the response has been, the council will continue to seek opportunities for provision of maintenance services to trunk road maintenance agents and continue to monitor the market for further opportunities in partnership working. Is that the answer to greater collaboration with private sector organisations, which was the finding?
What it's referring to is there has been and it's not covered part of this, but I guess from another thing that I've been involved in, there has been a review carried out recently looking at should there be closer collaboration and working, as you say, between councils' own roads maintenance and the maintenance of the trunk roads has been carried out by Transport Scotland. Most of that maintenance by Transport Scotland, you will be aware, though it is with the private sector, organisations such as Bayer and Amy and the like carry out that. I suspect this is something that's still going to be looked at over the next year. Is there some sort of synergy that can be achieved here that might get more for the money that's being spent here? But it's a difficult area, actually, a difficult area.
Any other members? Councillor Ferguson, first time speaker.
Thank you, Chair. I just refer to the first bullet point on page 10 of the introduction. And I appreciate these are Scottish Government figures, and the 63% of roads are unacceptable, or are in acceptable condition. Sorry. To give us a context, I would have been very helpful if that had been transferred into the percentage, because to reach that figure, they must have had each 32 local authorities' figures. So our figures would have been absolutely very helpful to have there, and then it would maybe put it into a perspective and see where we stand on this, because I travel quite extensively through Scotland, and I have to say, whilst I in no way say that we don't need to improve our road system, we do, but compared to other areas, we are relatively lucky. And I'm not minimising what I say, right? And I'm not minimising the need to improve. But when you go to other areas and you see massive potholes in big, very, very busy urban streets, not motorways, City of Glasgow is a particular concern to me. It would really put it into perspective for us if we had those figures.
We don't have them to hand. I think whoever carried out the original report probably has got them, but we can. Let us see if we can. It's not difficult for us to perhaps see if we can get that information for you. If we can, we'll get it. Because I agree with you, that would be useful, because a lot of this is relative, isn't it? Yeah.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, if I could come back, Chair, to the advice being given or proffered, and it's sound advice. The synergy that's being referred to and your remarks, Chair, then I think we do. And as one who travels the A75 trunk road, I'm continually seeing the private sector operations and how we do tender work, as the contractor and then the subcontractor in terms of responding to trunk roads. And it's more to where we've got responsibility on the other roads. In how we apply, and the idea of the hot tar and so forth was a move towards it. So I think there is something here in terms of how our figure fares with a national average of 63% would be an interesting figure. It's what we do with that, because the recommendations are, members are asked to note and comment on the external audit report, Dumfries and Galloway Council local follow-up report to maintaining Scotland's roads. And I think there should be a further recommendation in here, because if this, and we take the remarks made by Andy Ferguson, that we are a lot luckier, then we don't live just in Dumfries and Galloway, as Andy has indicated. We're going to other parts, and I don't know just how luckier we are in comparison to others, but we've got to use the information in terms of how we feed this back to COSLA then back to on the single outcome agreements and everything else back to the Scottish Government. Because if that figure of 63% or 65%, and even against our figure, Andy, starts to fall even further back, then we've got to have a means by which we can get this to central government to say, this is really to do with the settlement, and not just for them to say, well, it's you to determine your priority of services, as they rightly can do. Which, again, it becomes a political issue, and I don't expect the external audit to join in on that. But this committee can. And this committee perhaps should be doing that, and maybe referring this to scrutiny. And I'll take governance advice on that one, in terms, should we really be scrutinising our policy and procedures in terms of how realistic, and I know how realistic the report is, But, you know, in the real world, are we ever going to achieve any improvement on it? Is something for scrutiny. So for audit, to refer it back to scrutiny, to really scrutinise our policies and procedures in terms of how effective, because it becomes an annual rubber stamping if we don't. And that the service will continue to diminish, decrease, whatever words you want to use. The customer complaints will continue to rise. The compensation levels will rise even higher. And we're really doing nothing with the report. And I think it's perhaps something that we should be referring back to scrutiny, to scrutinise the policy and then to see just how effective it's being and whether we need to be referring it back to COSLA and other means of getting it back to the central government, Scottish Government.
Thank you for that. But I'd like to go to the recommendations here.
That would be my recommendation to add to it. That would be my recommendation that we
Well, he'd already alluded to the fact that the recommendations, that's what I'm saying. Let's go to the recommendations. Councillor Dryburgh?
Thanks, Ian. I think there's maybe one step before we go to Scrutiny Committee, which is that obviously DG First Management Committee are the committee that actually look at this, the roads in Dumfries and Galloway. And I think this report would be an opportunity to take to that particular committee and say to the management of DG First, how are you going to improve the standards? Once we have the percentage and all that sort of carrying for local areas, how are you going to try and improve the percentage of road repairs, etc., with regards to this report? Then perhaps if after a period of time there is no improvement, then it goes to scrutiny to see how that actually happens then. I think that might be the way forward.
Mr Haswell?
Can I just say, sir, that this report, as I understand it, has been the subject of a couple of reports to the Planning and Environment Services Committee. That's the parent committee for roads. And I think that I can be corrected by our external auditor, or indeed our internal auditor. I think that based on the recommendations here, it will be necessary to go back to the Planning, Housing and Environment Services Committee in any event to look at how this is happening. And that's where initially, I think I would agree with Councillor Driver, except I don't think the DG First Management Committee has got the power to do that. I think if the PHE Committee looked at it and there was any dissatisfaction, then scrutiny could certainly call it in and have a look at it. I'll certainly make a note of it in my personal notes here, but I think you will find that there will be a report come back on the back of this to Planning, Housing and Environment Services Committee, sir. And that's the appropriate committee for scrutiny in the first instance.
Briefly, Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, just a wee bit, I suppose, showing my naivety here, being a new boy. Is there a list telling us which roads that we are actually responsible for maintaining and the ones that are absolutely? And what would be really handy, and this is where we're coming in, because it's the dissemination of the information in the Scottish report to the local level, is that, and a lot of the stuff that Willie was alluding to there on the A75, which is a trunk road, which will not, my understanding, wouldn't be our responsibility to maintain. So we need to separate them out. Yeah, and I would actually suggest that there should be a fourth action on the action plan, and action plan would be to make it very clear for members and members of the public exactly which roads are maintained and by whom.
That information is available.
But it's not clear, because where do you find it? Because if you can just, before the auditor comes in, just 2 seconds, is that we just sat through a presentation on earlier today on the number of complaints that come in about roads. And if the members of the public don't know which road it's the local authority, are they complaining to the right people, right, or the wrong people? That's what I'm getting at.
Sorry, but you will have information which roads are your own. The report that is worth looking at, if you want to see, so it's very clear in terms of what are the trunk roads, is that the Performance Audit Group of Transport Scotland produce a report every year which sets out in some detail and a lot of pretty valuable information, I've got to say, management information about actually how the roads are being, which trunk roads are being covered, how they're being maintained, etc. You should be able to access that on the Transport Scotland website, actually, and it will give, I think you might find that quite useful in terms of just reading, just having a glance at it. We'll give some good statistics of the bits that aren't the responsibility of the council.
Recommendations, are you?
Yeah, Chair, it wasn't a criticism on me being so. It was so that we can get, the whole report to bodies that we know can do the lobbying, like COSLA and any others. It might be Plan, Housing, Environment want to do their own lobbying. It may be that it's got to, and it's notwithstanding what governance said in terms of its Plan, Housing, Environment, it's a responsibility to scrutinise and make recommendations equally. Once we set policy, if policy is setting well below, the budget rather, setting well below an achievable figure, then it makes the report unachievable in terms of moving, from that 65% to increase it, to improve it. So that's why I said scrutiny, but quite happy with what's being said. If it's Plan and Housing Environment that looks at it in the first instance, but I do believe that scrutiny should be looking at the setting of the policy in March of 2013 in terms of its budget 13-14, and that figure of 65%. Whether it just, this becomes futile in terms of its reporting. So that was the reason for that, and it wasn't me being censorious, it was me saying that the Scottish Government, in terms of its single outcome agreement, has got to look at that in terms of that. And for Councillor Ferguson, that seems to refer to him as the new kid in the block, and the rule of thumb is all roads that are adopted, and that's anything below a trunk road in A, B, C, right down to housing scheme estates where we've adopted the road. And that's how far this goes. So it is.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. Thank you for that. Mr Haswell?
As I understand it, sir, what you're doing is you're referring the three recommendations back to the Planning, Housing and Environment Services Committee with an officer report on the follow-up on implementing the recommendations.
Yeah, Chair, maybe a bit further than that in terms of the policy that will be set by the budget for 2013-14, because if it's never going to achieve that increase, then that would come back to this audit report, and I presume this will be an annual report that we will be looking at.
I need to take you back to the point that Mr Reevy made. You've got an allocated sum of money. It's for the members, the elected members, to determine how that money is being spent. We have a number of roads policies, many of which are implemented but can only be implemented to a certain extent. The policy is implemented, but it's not implemented across as wide a section of the road network as everybody would like, because the cash isn't there. The point is that the budget will determine how much money is available for roads. In terms of revenue, there is of course a capital budget as well.
Hence my reason, Chair, if you don't mind, in saying that scrutiny gets an opportunity to look at the policy.
Mr Haswell doesn't think that is competent. So
I'm more than happy to put it forward, Chair.
Chairman, what Councillor Scobie is saying is that he wants the Scrutiny Committee to review the Council's budget setting. Is that correct? If you on this issue only, I'm sorry, sir, that is not possible to do that. That's not practical, and I don't think it's a competent way forward. Chairman, I'm asking you to make a ruling.
We go forward to item 11.
Chair, item 11 is our external audit plan for the year we're now in, actually. We obviously produced this a couple of months ago, but the key time is to bring it to you for your the next committee meeting, which is this one, actually. If I could just, my colleague and I will just do a quick double act through it for me, and happy again to take any questions. Starting point, page 167 of your papers, is to inform you of our responsibilities as your external auditor as we sort of said last year, we follow the principles, not the exact word, but the principles set out in the Code of Audit Practice produced by Audit Scotland, though we are, of course, PwC. We're not Audit Scotland, but we follow the principles of that code. We also are governed very much by international standards in auditing. That's the key thing that we need to follow. And there's a ream of these that we need to comply with when we do our audit. In terms of that section one, not much more than that to say that perhaps we just then talk you through broadly our audit approach, and Tony will pick up in a second. We'll talk a little about governance, talk about areas we see as particular areas of particular audit risk, and emphasise audit risk, things that would, when we talk about audit risk, that is quite an important distinction between business risks, the business risks you're facing. When we talk about audit risks, there's something that could potentially lead to a material misstatement of the financial statements. So we've got a materiality level we work to, and it's an area where we feel potentially could create something of an error or the equivalent that would be material enough that would cause us to qualify your accounts. That's when we talk about an audit risk, and Tony will pick these up separately. Tony, do you want to go perhaps the audit approach?
Yeah, the audit approach will be similar to the one we used last year. It's a risk-based methodology that Cameron was just describing, where we assess the significant and elevated risks, we call them, that we put particular emphasis on our audit work, and then everything else is a normal risk that we will test within our audit approach. So the first thing we'll do is just understand the environment which in the council operates, and also understand the controls that are in place, and then make the decision of what controls that we could actually rely on and test those, as well as testing substantively items at the year end. We set our materiality level based on total expenditure. For this year, we're estimating that our materiality is likely to be in the region of 8 million, and we will report any unadjusted misstatements to you over 200,000. Another requirement for ISA is for us to consider the work of internal audit and to see where we can rely on the work of internal audit. So we've got a meeting with the head of internal audit, Kevin, after this to discuss areas that we can work together, and areas that internal audit can do where we can place reliance. Specific examples that we've listed in this report, reliance on key systems. Principally for us, that would be accounts payable and expenditure, as listed as one of our significant risks later on in the report. Statutory performance indicators, grant claims, and follow-up of Audit Scotland national reports. We're grateful for Kevin for his cooperation with this. If I just jump to page 175, where we've actually listed where the significant and elevated risks that we've identified for the current year. First one, management override of controls. This is a standard risk that you'll find in every audit, because it's an ISA requirement that we have this in. So for that, we will be understanding the fraud arrangements within the council to prevent such instances happening, and also target manual journals and also the NFI results. The second significant risks, again, which is a standard one across all the councils, is recognition of expenditure, and as part of this we will assess the controls around accounts payable and expenditure, as well as specific testing at the year end. Equal pay provision and introduction of the new finance system are both elevated risks, and again that means that there will just be a heightened level of audit evidence required over and above a normal risk.
If I could just pull you back, members, to page 173, that's section 4. What that refers to is some additional things that we do. We are part of the sort of the local area network, your local scrutiny group, and that meets periodically to look at areas. Say, and there was a meeting which Tony attended in December, and there was some discussion. And Alex, I think Mr. Hazel, I'm not sure who was there from the council actually. Gavin was there as your chief exec from the council, and a couple of areas were discussed, and we'd already talked about social work services. Social work services was seen as one of the areas that you, even as a council, feel is of higher risk and that you're focusing on, and there was a couple of other areas that come out of that, and I can report these back when it's formally produced following December, the areas that come out of that. We touched on already the local response to national reports that Audit Scotland produce. You do that yourself. And I know that's something that Kevin, as your head of audit, is interested in as well. And again, we will liaise with Kevin around that. We also need to, as well as your normal financial statements, we do need to sign off a whole of government accounts, effectively your information going forward to produce a big set of accounts for the whole of government. So we need to do that as well. We've touched on National Fraud Initiative. We do need to, where you are a little different than most councils as well, is that as part of what we do need to do a separate audit of your pension fund. Now, because that is a separate set of accounts, what we use is we have to use, just duty bound within PwC, we use pension specialists for that. So neither Tony or I would actually do the detail. I would have an overview, but it's pension specialists that will actually do that, and we brought that to you last year as well. And the final part there we touch on in page 174 is police and fire reform. And I understand that there is some discussions going on just now, in particular for councils similar to you who have police as part of your services. Does there need to be some sort of small, mini, separate audit by the auditor? And I understand there is some discussions with Audit Scotland going on just now around that whole area to see if that might be necessary. So that might be an additional requirement for us this year, which would be a one-off requirement because of the particular circumstances. Page 177 simply just sets out the main documents that we would expect to be producing during the year, the timing of that, when we would anticipate that would be coming to this committee as well. And page 178 has got our mug shots there with just a little bit of background about us actually. And I can see that, yes, it is, it's okay. I much prefer to have the photograph of me 20 years ago. See, they haven't got that one there. I'd have been happier with that, but Tony, you'll need to do better next time. I prefer that one where I look much younger. But it just sets out a team. The good thing about that team, there's two things. One, that's a consistent, it was the first year audit last year. That's a consistent team. We worked on the audit last year, so that can only help. And also I can give you that assurance that we are independent of the council. So we've got no contact with the council out with the audit.
Councillor Scobie.
Yes, Chair, I know who I'm talking to, Mr. Revy, and maybe the folk doesn't be right. However, I'm glad you're coming and know me. Could I perhaps go back in history a bit here? And the external auditor's report picked up some not so many years ago, and some of us will remember, and it kept putting this as a risk, was the underspend, if you like, in the transfer fund, which is now referred to as the change fund. And we had year on year on year on year of the same thing appearing. And it really goes back to the earlier part I made in what powers the external auditor has in terms of the page on 173. And it, and the four bullet points there, where it says details of any action plan resulting from self-assessment. And then the next one is monitoring of progress against the action plan by management. And the reason I go back in history is just to highlight, it could be reported here at the Audit Committee, and if all audit's doing is rubber stamping the issues, then we are not, in my opinion, doing the job as the Audit Committee in terms of making sure, not only in terms of the audit, the external auditor falling through, but we as an Audit Committee to ensuring that the work is being carried out. Because if we take the example being given, and the most serious one that I have picked up on is the social work, where it's constantly in overspend and trying to via or going to policy and resources. If we haven't got that right, if we don't tackle that as an audit committee where we're being referred to by the external auditor that this is an issue, then it will become a rubber stamping exercise, and really it's almost to describe the toothless tiger, where external can report to us, but if we don't do anything about it, then we would be failing in our duty as an audit committee, audit and risk committee. And it's really just to get a response from the external auditors on that, because it's really just laying out what audit actually does. And perhaps if that had been at the front of the page, then the rest would have been superfluous, unless we can act as an audit committee to back up what external auditors are telling us, then it just becomes superfluous.
Let me take the first example you gave, then go into the more detailed point for me first. in terms of, and I don't know the detail of obviously the reporting, that part, but what I do know, what I do look at, and if you look at my reporting, I do look that you set yourself a general fund unallocated strategy, so money you're not going to use each year. And that's effectively a fund that can be brought forward. And I do look closely to see how much of that is genuinely committed, so that you're not carrying lots of funding or not using funding you shouldn't be. So I do that, but I do it at that level, rather than the level perhaps you're describing. In terms of audit responsibility, if I felt at any stage there was a fundamental breakdown in an area of some materiality and significance in this council, then I would not just report that to you, I would obviously report that to the Accounts Commission. The Accounts Commission does have powers, and it's been known in other councils where they have taken action in council. Now, you're not in that situation. I emphasise this, so I'm not trying to create some sort of the situation. but you're not based on the work that I've done so far. So the situation in terms of that's concerned, in terms of and the member has come back to the social work services again, and I gather that is an area of concern you may have. Absolutely, no different than any other area. I expect you as an audit committee to take the things I say seriously, and I expect you to actually ensure that the things that I say, where officers have agreed to take action, are taking action. Absolutely. And that's not just with social work services. But I think you know that anyway. But you do have that role and responsibility, and you take it seriously. If in any of these areas that I've raised in my reporting, when we go back and look at them, we find it's not enough, then I'm going to be coming back to this committee going, this isn't good enough. That's the language I will use. We've been told that this is going to happen. It's not good enough. And I don't like reports, any reports coming back to you where I'm putting in it overdue or should have happened or whatever. I want to come back with I'm using Kevin's format, ticks that say this has been dealt with actually. So that's the power I have around that, to do that. But the responsibility for the stewardship, as you know, of this council and of the finances of this council rests with you, not with me.
If I could come back, Chair, just to one, I don't challenge or impugn your professional integrity on anything that you say there, but, it would be heartening to hear, that you would come back. I go back to the 2005, I think it was, report by external auditor that did give this council a poor response, and it came back to leadership, which was the highlight of that particular report. And indeed, I well remember meeting with Peter Peacock, that was the minister at the time, where we were touch and go as to whether they were going to put in an external administration to this council in 2005. So that was via the Accounts Commission and everything else. And it's your independence of that, and that is not compromised, where if you have to make such a report, so be it that it's either on social work or on roads or whatever, that we have or I have your assurance that you would do that, where there is strong language used that would clarify and or confirm that you were not happy. Because again, it's the piper, he who pays the piper calls the tune. I hope that's not the case, and that's not to impugn or suggest.
The only assurance I can give to the member is that actually, not that I like that situation, but there are a number of audits that we've carried out elsewhere that have led to statutory reports and action, whether that be in the local government, health or other sectors. So I'm going to do that, because you're right, you're absolutely right. From my professional point of view, I'm duty bound to do that. I'm going to do that. So that's going to happen if that was the case.
Councillor Driver, followed by Councillor McKee.
Thanks very much. In actual fact, Councillor Scobie answered asked one of the questions I was going to ask there, which is good. I'm a common 5/8 kind of guy, right? And when you look at words like materiality and all that in the written context without your explanation earlier on, I was a bit, what does that actually mean? So I'm glad you actually said that, and I just want to make sure that I've got it right. It's how it is working to the financial plan that you're doing the audit, what materiality actually means, in layman's terms.
Yeah, materiality determines the level of work that I think I need to do. If I had a lower materiality level than that, then I potentially might do different work or more work. That's exactly it. And as Tony touched on, the materiality level we work to is fully compliant with the international standards in auditing. And what she's giving you is a feel for that around £8 million. The question perhaps that's relevant to members is, though invariably in an organised list, we do find things that aren't accurate. Yeah? But what we're saying is anything that's under 200,000 we wouldn't plan to bring back to you and say it's there. Also, I emphasise the things that we find that your officers agree to adjust, I won't bring these back to you because they're just adjusting, they're just agreeing to do them. The things I'd bring back to you is where we've got a disagreement over something. I wouldn't expect that. But that's materiality is common phrase in auditing. Yeah.
Chairman, just to go back to an issue that Councillor Scobie raised, I would not want anything factually inaccurate taken forward from this committee. At no point did the Scottish Government confirm that they were going to put any form of administration into this council. The audit report, the best value report, came out and was dealt with by the authority appropriately. So I don't know where the conversation that Councillor Scobie may have had with a former Scottish minister, but that was never an official stance taken against this council. I wouldn't want that reported in the press. I merely correct the factual inaccuracy because this will go out. It's now available on the media because it's being recorded.
Thank you. Councillor McKee.
Hi, thanks, Chair. I'm glad you come back on materiality because that's where I was going to. Is there any way in your next report you could make sure that that's no yes? Could do it in simple language, please. It's a query I've got in this equal pay provision. I don't know whether you can answer it or whether Mr. Hazel maybe. This closing balance provision 7.985, I have a feeling that was about the level of funding we set aside originally. And goodness knows how many years ago that was. Are we no moving, or is there sufficient money in the kitty to cover these equal pay issues?
How the provision would work is actually it wouldn't be the original provision, but where you've actually had to pay anything out, you'll take money out of the provision, but you'll put new money into it. So it just happens that the balance, if that was, I'm not sure if that was the original thing that you set a number of years ago, I'm not sure about that. What we've done is we've had a look at the detailed papers that you have as a council, said what bits do you really know you're going to have to pay out somewhere, and there's a calculation, and that comes back to broadly that's £7.958 million. So it's not that it's the original, it may be the same number, but it's not actually the original, necessarily the original provision. Money's been taken out of it, new things, as new claims have come in there actually. That's the issue. So it's probably coincidental.
So you could say we're addressing the equal pay issue, but we haven't got enough money to cover it. We're having to top it up all the time.
I think if the contingent liability issue comes to fruition for all councils in Scotland, I'm not sure where you'll find the money for all of it. Very blunt with you, some of the numbers that are being bandied about from the contingent liability, but that's why it's contingent, because it may not come to fruition. We've all read the stuff in Birmingham and places like that, and some of the numbers that are being talked about equal pay, well, we're concerned about where we find the money for roads. It pales into insignificance compared to some of the numbers that are being bandied about. Why? But it's contingent just now.
I'm going to Councillor Ferguson, then I'm going to go to the recommendations. Which point's that, Councillor?
From the Governor's Office of Mr. Haswell, I'm sure that the passing of time, memories become blurred. If I was misleading this committee, then that was not the intention. And it comes back to when someone shares something with you, is it a secret any longer? I believe it's no longer a secret. So, my reference was to a private conversation that I had with the Minister at the time. Mr. Haswell's correct, and I appreciate his clarification. It was not contained in a document at the time. So if I have misled this committee, then that was not my intention.
I apologise if Councillor Scobie felt I was being censorious. I was not suggesting he misled. As he says, memories go in the mists of time. I did check with the internal auditor before I made any comment, but I felt that it was appropriate not to allow something factually inaccurate to appear on the record. And that's one of the issues that we're going to have to bear in mind as members and as officers when these things are recorded and appear on the website.
Councillor Ferguson, then we'll go to the recommendations.
Thanks for letting me in, Chair. Just a question I'd like to ask Cameron, if you don't mind me calling you that, just to prove that Newby actually read the whole report. It's about the issue again, equal pay provision, and my understanding was the old figure that Jock McKee referred to, nearly about £8 million, when in actual fact was for the single status settlement. And equal pay and single status, although entwined, are actually separate issues. So if we're setting aside, say, the balance provision of nearly 8 million, because single status is actually kicked in operation just now, what I'm more worried about is how many cases do we have pending tribunal? Because I understand it is a huge, huge waiting list for proof hearings.
I couldn't answer that question off the top of my head, but plus the fact that it's not only how many has Dumfries and Galloway got outstanding. When a tribunal makes a ruling, it becomes a precedent and it affects the whole of Scotland. So this council has made what it considered to be a reasonable contingency as against equal pay claims. You've heard what Mr Reevy has said about it. That's not just in Dumfries and Galloway, that's at a national level. And I think I can give the member the outstanding number of cases. In fact, I think what we're doing at the moment as a management team is pulling together a report on equal pay and the number of claims outstanding. So that will be coming back. That's part of the action plan, as far as I can see, referred to earlier on. So that will come forward to members in due course. But I can't give you a detailed answer to that question at this time, sir.
Okay, recommendations, gentlemen? Thank you very much for those reports. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Chair. Item 12, internal audit reports issued. As the covering report says, this is a standing item on the agenda of the committee where we report finalised reports issued, give members an opportunity to discuss them, and then we publish them. There are 3 reports on this occasion. Members should have received copies of these reports through a separate circulation. Copies, as standing protocol, are also put into group rooms as a bundle, and they're also put on the internal SharePoint site. So hopefully everybody's seen these. 3 reports. One is the main financial systems report, the first of our reports this year on that area. That's our priority area of work on banking. And 2 others relating to the programme of work to visit secondary schools and look at the operation of their school funds. And the 2 reports are for Langham and for Moffat. No significant matters to report, Chair. We've agreed satisfactory plans with management, action plans, and they will obviously come into the tracking system over the course of the year. As you know, as recommendations fall due, there'll be progress on them will be reported. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Any members' questions? Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Kevin, for the audit reports, as I mentioned. I just want I do have a slight concern about high school audit balances, in that they tend to work very similar, but they're out of tweak with each other, if you know what I mean. Are you confident that this action plan, in the 2 cases here and potentially other cases elsewhere, that the finance systems within the schools that are in the main money which comes from either pupil activity or fundraising or whatever that is being appropriately managed?
Yes, Chair. The school funds sort of sit out with the council's finances. They don't come into our accounts. But they are public monies, although legally I think they're regarded as what we call private monies. So if there was a fraud, for instance, it's a question of who has the right to complain about that, who the loser is, etc. So But it's a well-established system for schools to enhance what they can do for pupils through the school fund. And as you say, there are a lot of fundraising activities go on, parental groups and others and so on, and a lot of activities, dances and these sorts of things that occur at the school. The balances are, they're not immense, but they're perhaps, to the layperson, fairly surprising. £25,000 is quite a lot of money. It's interesting in the two reports, there's a contrast between the two. In one of them, we point out that the school told us that pretty well 90% of what was in the bank was committed, that was their perspective on those funds. So they in effect, they're funding for future activities of payments due out of things that they're doing currently. The other one, that sort of the balance is sitting there. It's healthy, it's handsome, but it certainly probably wouldn't last a year, if you see what I mean. So overall, that's the point of the audits, is to establish that schools have got a proper governance approach to this. The key thing, and this committee itself at last committee made a recommendation to the Education Committee that a good practice be adopted whereby an annual account is prepared for the school fund and published on notice boards so parents can see the sorts of sums of money involved and the sorts of activities that are involved. So the governance is the main emphasis, plus then operational things. And so far, we've been very satisfied with what schools are doing. It is a long-established system, well embedded. There is some diversity in the way that schools approach these things, but across the piece, we're certainly satisfied to date with everything we've seen.
Recommendations? Oh, Councillor McKee.
Sorry, Chair, just a couple of things. On page 2, charges and errors may not be identified. Does each department check their own charging cooperative bank charges? And another thing was potential loss of control stationery. The blank cheques held at Bank of Scotland will be destroyed. What are they holding blank cheques for? And what's on the blank cheques? Is there an amount of money just needing a signature?
No, Chair. We've changed the way that we do cheque printing, and that's perhaps not come out too well in the report. I apologise for that. We used to use pre-printed cheque stationery. So we've got 2 lots of cheque stationery, one with Robin Benny's signature pre-printed on it, and one lot with Julian Cowie's signature pre-printed on it. They're all obsolete. Those cheques, in fact, even if they were stolen, the bank wouldn't honour them. And if they did honour them, it would be on their account. The council would have, because they've been cancelled long since. But we've just got these boxes sitting at the bank that need to be destroyed. The new approach, we're using a different type of cheque stationery where the signature is printed on the cheque as it's produced. So we haven't got pre-signed stationery, we've actually got the signature, if you like, is embedded in the print programme. So it's just that, Chair, that we're talking about destroying this old stationery, which, should have been got rid of a few years ago, but we just happened to discover it was sitting at the bank and some was sitting in a cupboard, and we've arranged for all that to be dealt with. Thanks, Chair. Yes, this is the 9 months progress against the Internal Audit Plan report, Chair. We do 6 months, 9 months, and then an outturn. The general picture is we're making quite good progress against the plan. As I say, we've issued the banking arrangements report. The key work, if you like, the priority work, for a number of reasons, is the main financial systems work, which we do on a 3-year cycle. We've got all the other audits underway. They've all had a start made on them. So we're on target for completing that work by year end. Risk management is another area that's been quite important this year. We took responsibility for risk management from the 1st of April, so we're putting resources into that. It's not defined in terms of individual projects, but we've got an officer working on that, working to develop risk management, and that's going okay. The budget provision for that's right. We shouldn't have any problems with that. And then other areas, departmental business systems, again, we're making good progress in terms of the work that we're achieving. So I'm pretty confident that with some adjustments to individual job budgets, I think, but we'll come in on target by the end of the year.
Councillor Drybrough.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I'm just looking at the appendix and the other planned work when you've got the Swestrands annual statement and the local government pension scheme. I would believe that LGPS is a variance of minus 10 days. Are you happy you've got enough days to actually do the audit on that?
Yes, Chair. I mean, I've had to make an adjustment. You know, we only have a defined amount of resource, and I'm balancing it across different headings. But yes, originally we put quite a lot of resource into the Swest Trans, producing a controls assurance statement for Swest Trans. It was particularly complicated for a couple of years by the Sustainable Travel Town grant, which we were trying to make sure that the rules for that were being followed. It got very complicated because it started to roll up into itself, and then we got extra money called LUPS money as well, which made it even more complicated. So we've come off that pretty well. The programme is just about complete, and so that's why I've been able to reduce the resource on it, because previously there was quite a lot of work involved in tracking everything that was going on. We can do that, I think. In terms of the controls assurance statement, Swest Trans is using council systems. Mostly, there are some specific requirements for controlling the expenditure so it gets logged to the right company, so to speak. But it is fairly straightforward, and the checks we need to do for that are relatively simple.
Can we go to the recommendations? Agreed?
Just one thing, Chair. I mean, obviously there's a lot of work for a small group, and to stick to plan, and that is obviously good news for the audit team, and it's just to put on record our thanks for the work they're actually doing.
I think we'd all agree to that one, Councillor Dryborough. Item 14.
Thanks, Chair. This is again standing report, performance against internal audit action plans. I think you're probably all pretty familiar now with the approach, the ticks, crosses and egg timers and so on. The stats at the front tries to give you a summary of the position so we can have a look at performance and see how we're doing. Nothing too significant this time. It's been a couple of quarters since we've had any not done recommendations. So it's a shame really. We had a pretty good run for a while where all recommendations due in a quarter were being done. But it's inevitable sometimes that people miss targets and sort of say, can we have an extension on them? So there's nothing too much to worry about in it. Members did ask, in particular, I'll draw your attention to the Schools PPP contract management report that was discussed at the last committee. That's page 197 on your papers. At the last committee, you did actually ask for an interim position report with, I think, a specific report to come to the April meeting. And this is how we're discharging that requirement. It's in the last set of minutes. But this is how we're discharging it, you know, in accordance with our normal sort of recommendations tracking. Nothing to worry about here. Good progress being made. And I think, you know, we're pleased to see some of the improvements that we asked for coming about. And I think the committee can be satisfied that management are giving this full and proper attention. On other audits, again, as I say, there's nothing particularly to worry about. I wouldn't draw your attention to anything in particular on this occasion.
Just a couple of questions. Number 2, reduce the number of unsuccessful log-on attempts allowed for Northgate and W2. Maybe clarify exactly what that is, please.
On the council tax one.
Is that what it is? Oh, aye. On income management, you've got a reconciliation where a second person should be available. Is 2 sufficient, given that one could be on holiday and the second one could be off sick? Does that cover the reconciliations that you want to do? And that'll do. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. That one specifically relates to the cash book reconciliation, which at the time of the audit was being done by a single person. The difficulty was that if they took a holiday, the rec wasn't done. So what it meant was that instead of having, say, a weekly reconciliation of the cash book, it was a variable reconciliation. So sometimes it could have 10 days in it, could have 15 days, could be down to 4 days. We found that unsatisfactory. We wanted to see the discipline introduced. So that's why we asked for a second person to be made available, Chair, so that there's certainty involved. You know, we're looking for a week, basically, for the thing to be reconciled weekly and for it always to be done weekly, not a variable amount of time. So 2 would be sufficient. It's a very complicated reconciliation. I spent, I have to say, 2 or 3 days trying to get my head around it, and I had a serious headache at the end of it. The person doing it is really good and knows their stuff, and it took me some considerable work to understand it. Very complicated, but successful and a good reconciliation. That's why I think one person was doing this, is because to keep your knowledge up, you need to be doing it regularly. The second person did it some years ago, and we're bringing her back in, and we'll keep her up to speed in terms of the way it's done. So we've got some assurance it can be done every week.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure, Kevin, if it's right enough here, but just a bit of clarity for me. There's a number of the issues relate to having to adapt software. And I think really what we'd like would be an assurance that you're actually consulted before new software is bought, rather than come along and add a very expensive clamp on to existing software. You know, do you get consulted when a service area purchases new software?
That's a good question, Chair, and it's also a principle. The difficulty is that auditors have to remain independent so that they can audit something. If they've contributed to the development of something or the installation of something, they then can't audit it. So we have this dilemma, this professional dilemma, which is to say we want to give advice to people about how to do things well and successfully, but then if we give them too much advice, in effect they're doing what we say, and then we can't audit it, so it's tricky. Software in particular in this council, big software systems are major investments. They can take a significant amount of time and involve a great number of people. And historically, the council has not been terribly good at bringing auditors in at the right time. We're usually brought in towards the end of an installation or the end of a development and asked our opinion, by which stage some of what we might have suggested, the opportunity to do that has lost. So it's much less a question of us putting a clamp on the system. It's more likely to be that the system puts a clamp on us in terms of this is the way we've organised it and we kind of don't care if you're worried about it. We'll have to deal with that in a future situation. So it's, you know, we work with officers and on software development and so on and installations of systems. We're always available to discuss it, but there's an element, there's a balance to be struck, as I say, across the piece. On some occasions, I think we might have improved an installation or we might have improved the way that something was implemented. But if you look at something like iTrent, which took place over 2.5 years, had a huge team of people involved, it's unrealistic really to expect auditors to be able to contribute to every aspect of that. At the end of the day, it's management's decision about how to do things, the best way to organise and put them in with sufficient controls in place. And if there aren't sufficient controls, the audits that we do pick that up and we bring that back to management and insist that they make some changes. That's very much the story of iTrent, was some of the things that they did in order to make the system operate, left a few holes, shall we say, in one or two places, which we then covered with the audit that we did, which was a very comprehensive audit.
Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks, Chair. And there's nothing like auditing the auditor. There's four particular audit recommendations in schools PPP on Alex Haswell, of all people. And I just want to make sure that, Alex, you get, you know, you're happy with the information and issues that are raised with you and the actions that are that come out of that. And are you given sufficient resource to deal with the particular issues? As I say, there's four in the schools PPP contract management for you, and in particular, it's making sure that, you know, officers are available for doing certain issues.
The short answer is yes. I think we would all like to have more staff resource, but realistically, we have got to work with the staff resource that's available. Obviously, in terms of the PP contract management, I discussed it fully with the internal auditor, and we prioritised, you'll see the prioritisation down there, what required doing on a priority basis, and that's how I'm working through it. So there are a couple there where we're not due to report back for a reasonable period of time to give us the time to get the work done. But I'm happy with the imposition of these requirements on me.